The old woman pointed at the faint blur of light in the air and solemnly shouted, "Go!" Suddenly, red and white light flickered, and the lightning fire spike fiercely struck the blue crystal wall in front of the old woman. With a muffled bang, lightning and flames ruptured and enveloped the side of the wall. The resulting light made the scene blinding to the eye. Han Li's pupils contracted. Although he wasn't able to see it, the spike's spiritual chi fluctuations were quite powerful. It was no wonder why Lady Tai held such confidence in it. But against the wondrous soul restriction this power is. Before Han Li finished his thoughts, the lightning fire had already faded away. The spike was gently floating several inches away from the wall, but the wall appeared completely unscathed. Marquis Nanlong revealed a trace of disappointment, but then he chuckled and said, "While the might of this magic treasure is quite powerful, it still lacks the strength to break through the wondrous soul restriction. Thank you for your trouble, fellow Taoist Tai. Are there any other fellow Taoists that wish to make an attempt to break the restriction?" Unresigned, the woman snorted and said, "When did I say that this was my treasure's true power? It was merely a probing strike. It seems anything less than its complete stress won't do." Marquis Nanlong's eyes brightened and he happily said, "Oh, if fellow Taoist Tai still wishes to continue her attempt, please don't hesitate to do so." The old woman didn't reply and promptly held her hands in an incantation gesture. The floating lightning fire spike returned above the old woman's head. Then, under the influence of the old woman's incantation gestures, it began to revolve in place. Its speed began to quickly increase, slowly merging lightning and blazing fire as it emitted a strange hum. The others' spirits were shaken as they stared at the scene. A short moment later, the lightning fire spike appeared to have truly fused together its lightning and flames. Bizarre scarlet lightning continuously arced from its surface. This scene caused Han Li's heart to stir. He made a faint connection in his mind and he sunk into thought. The others were also amazed by this scene. They began to think higher of the lightning fire spike. "Break," the old woman muttered. With the sound of tearing wind, the lightning fire spike brimming with scarlet lightning disappeared from sight and struck the crystal wall once more. This time, there was no eruption of lightning or fire. There was only a light pop. With assistance from its high-speed rotations and scarlet lightning, it was able to drill into the crystal wall with only a moment of resistance. Once the drill bore into the wall, its speed greatly decreased, but under the influence of the old woman's incantation gestures, it slowly pulled forward and drilled with all its might. A short moment later, the white-clothed old man and Marquis Nanlong revealed delight. Wang Tiangu and the others watched the scene with spirited gazes and nervousness. It was unknown whether they hoped the old woman would succeed or fail. Han Li inwardly scoffed and wore a faint smirk on his face. No one else noticed Han Li's change of expression, except for Yan Ruyan, who had unintentionally glanced in Han Li's direction. The woman was startled for a moment and revealed a trace of bewilderment. When the lightning fire spike drilled about a foot into the crystal wall, it met calamity. The originally still crystal wall had suddenly shined with blue radiance. Countless threads of scorching white light emerged from the wall and tightly wrapped around the lightning fire spike in a profuse glimmering display. With a huge boom, the lightning fire spike exploded, and the resulting light faded away, revealing the wall to be completely restored. The old woman's face paled, but soon, furious alarm could be seen from her face. The fire lightning spike was an ancient treasure she had expended vast effort into acquiring. It was impossible for her to not feel distress over having it so easily destroyed. For a time, she felt a burning sensation at the pit of her stomach as if she were about to spit up blood. The others were dumbstruck by the sight and were quite alarmed. As for Yan Ruyan, she glanced at Han Li with astonishment and wore a pensive expression. Fortunately, the old woman was an exceptional character. After a moment of tense rage, she took a deep breath and was able to calm down her raging blood. She turned her heads to the other and bitterly smiled. "It seems I've made quite a fool of myself. The wondrous soul restriction is truly worthy of its name as one of the top 10 ancient formations. I have no method of destroying it. However, you fellow Taoists possess vast abilities. Perhaps one of you may be able to break the restriction." Once that was said, she took several steps back in a gesture of resignation. Marquis Nanlong's smile had long disappeared and he could only sigh. Despite fellow Taoist Tai's efforts, she failed. A truly unfortunate matter indeed. Are there any other fellow Taoists that are willing to give it a try? Once that was said, Marquis Nanlong glanced at Wang Tiangu in particular. After all, he was a spell formation grandmaster renowned throughout the cultivation world. But since the others witnessed the destruction of the old woman's ancient treasure, any interest in making an attempt had been thoroughly extinguished. With their attempts only ending in tremendous failure, who would dare to risk their treasures? Wang Tiangu remained silent as he stood at the corner of the hall. Although he did possess some understanding of ancient spell formations, he had yet to encounter something on the level of the 10 great ancient restrictions, let alone have a method to dissolve it. As such, he wasn't about to volunteer and make a fool of himself. Han Li, who had remained silent throughout this, suddenly spoke. As untalented as I am, I would like to make an attempt. How about it? He had spoke about the topic rather lightly. These words had greatly surprised the rest of the party. Marquis Nanlong was particularly surprised, but he said, "Of course, please go ahead, fellow Taoist Han." Han Li promptly took several steps forward and approached a side of the wall that hadn't been struck. When Wang Chan saw this, a trace of derision could be seen from his face once he recovered from his shock. He uttered a few sound transmissions to Yan Ruyan, but she hardly gave any reaction. As for Wang Tiangu, he maintained a calm exterior, but he was filled with bewilderment at the idea of Han Li breaking the formation. Han Li stood in front of the stone wall and didn't immediately take action. Instead, he raised his hand and extended his finger. He circulated spiritual power throughout his body and emitted a streak of light from his fingertip that was several inches long. In a pulse of light, he swept the azure streak past the surface of the crystal wall to no effect. Han Li wasn't discouraged by this and simply enveloped his hand in a layer of azure spirit qi. He then extended his 5 fingers and placed his palm against the wall. He was completely motionless as if he were sensing something. Han Li's strange actions were completely unfathomable to the cultivators watching him, but none stepped forward to bother him. Completely unbeknownst to the party, Han Li's eyes were faintly glowing with blue light as he deeply peered into the crystal wall. He seemed to be examining it with all his ability. After a quarter hour passed in this regard, the others didn't reveal any impatience or take the initiative to act. Han Li then sighed. The blue light disappeared from his eyes, and he reached towards his storage pouch without any hesitation and took out a pile of over 10 various-colored formation flags. The white-clothed old man quickly recovered from his surprise and excitedly asked, "So fellow Taoist Han was also proficient in the art of spell formations. Could it be your thinking for breaking a formation with a formation? Could it be you understand the mysteries of the wondrous soul restriction?" Han Li nonchalantly replied, "Understand what mystery? I merely studied in a few ancient formations of a similar type and want to give it a try." He soon spat a breath of azure qi onto the flags, causing them to brightly shine. Under Han Li's command, they flew out from his hand and pointed their flags in the direction of the crystal wall, then floated motionlessly in the air. Han Li formed an incantation gesture with his hands, and the dozen formation flags began to hover and arrange themselves in a strange formation as they faced the wall. It appeared incomprehensible. At that moment, Han Li began to softly utter an incantation, and a dozen incantation seals flew from his hands, accurately striking each of the flags in the formation. The flags trembled for a moment before shining with various colored lights and shooting out threads of light that wrapped around each other. Wang Tiangu and the other cultivators familiar with spell formations frowned. They felt this spell formation seemed somewhat familiar while knowing that they hadn't actually seen such a formation before. They all couldn't help but secretly analyze it as if wishing to discover its secret. As if unwilling to allow the other cultivators to study the profound aspects of the spell formation, he softly shouted and had the spell formation emit blinding white light. Those that were staring at the spell formation were caught off guard and were forced to turn their gazes away. While these old eccentrics were startled, they secretly channeled spiritual power through their eyes and immediately opened them once more. As a result, they couldn't help but reveal shock. They saw the flag formation was already embedded into the crystal wall without any mishap. It appeared almost as if the flags had grown out of the wall. At that moment, Marquis Nanlong and the white-clothed old man revealed delight. Their confidence in Han Li grew. Wang Tiangu's expression changed for just a moment, but Wang Chan, who stood behind him, revealed a complex amazement and was entirely amazed. Yan Ruyan slightly frowned and wore a puzzled expression as she gazed at the spell formation on the wall. Han Li took a few steps forward towards the wall and pressed his hands against it, his fingers faintly shining with azure light. At that same moment, the spell formation on the wall seemed to respond, as the center of the formation began to glow with rainbow light. The light became increasingly brilliant and gradually spread to cover the entire wall in a magnificent display. As everyone was entranced by the scene, Han Li pulled his hands away from the crystal wall and his figure blurred, reappeared at a neighboring wall. After examining it for a long while, he took out another set of formation flags and arranged the flags differently from the first formation. After they flickered with white light, they embedded themselves in the crystal wall once more. Because the cultivators were prepared and protected their eyes with spiritual light, they were able to clearly observe how easily the flags had pierced into the walls under Han Li's command. They couldn't help but click their tongues in surprise. Placing down the spell formations onto each of the 4 walls using this same method took no less than an hour. The other cultivators didn't reveal any impatience. They all knew that dissolving such a profound ancient restriction wasn't something that could be done easily. Having arranged a spell formation on each of the walls, Han Li walked to the center of the hall and raised his hand, revealing a green formation plate. He struck the plate with several complex incantation seals, causing both the plate and the 4 crystal walls to simultaneously twinkle with various colored light and pulse in pattern. Han Li didn't bother to glance around him and simply lowered his head, uttering, "Break." In the same instant he spoke, the light surged and released an ear-piercing cry. It became increasingly loud to the point where it sounded as if a myriad of birds had simultaneously cried out. A huge rumble shook the room, and the entire hall grew dim as the lights vanished. The others then discovered that the crystal walls surrounding them had unexpectedly vanished, only to be replaced with ordinary stone walls. One of the stone walls even had a stone gate that was 20 meters tall and 12 meters wide. A trace of joy flickered from Marquis Nanlong's face and he excitedly said, "I didn't expect that fellow Taoist Han was so skilled in spell formations. Haha, great. Fellow Taoist Yun and I will naturally keep our word. After we both get our pick, fellow Taoist will have priority in choosing a treasure." The white-clothed old man wore a smile when he saw the stone gate before him. His eyes were filled with a fervor. In his excitement, the tan cultivator restlessly said, "Brother Nanlong, let's see what lays inside. Surely there can't be more restrictions inside." Marquis Nanlong confidently said, "Be at ease, there can't be. According to what Master Kang Kun left behind, the cave residents should only have 2 layers of restrictions." He then stepped forward without another word and swept his sleeve past the stone gate, easily opening it. The many cultivators felt the last of their worries disappear when they saw them, and began to follow Marquis Nanlong outside. Once the old woman arrived outside the stone gate, she yelled in astonishment, "What is this?" Han Li and the rest of the party appeared astounded by what laid beyond the gate. There was a hall that was several times larger than the previous one, but there was also an exquisitely styled pavilion at the center of the large hall. This pavilion was created from translucent white jade. It was over 30 meters tall and had only 2 stories. On top of its 10-meter gate were the words "Jade Pure Pavilion" written in silver characters. Regardless of how it could be said, a pavilion at the center of the hall was an odd sight. There was a jet-black altar table that stood in front of the pavilion with a sparkling meter-long scroll that laid on top of it. As for the rest of the hall, it was completely vacant and lacked any other gates. Everyone instantly assumed that the treasure was to be hidden inside the pavilion. After Marquis Nanlong and the white-clothed old man glanced at each other, the old man walked towards the altar table with caution. The rest of the party felt their hearts stir, but they raised no objections. They simply calmly observed the old man's actions. The white-clothed old man hesitated for a moment before spitting out a mist of white light. The mist wrapped around the scroll and raised it up. With a series of turns, the scroll opened to reveal the portrait of a sword-bearing scholar that was gazing to the sky. "That is Master Kang Kun," the stern-faced cultivator asked with astonishment. Wang Tiangu's gaze flickered past the portrait and said, "It seems so. However, there should be a reason why it was enshrined there. However, it doesn't seem to be particularly precious in and of itself." After a moment of thought, the old man slowly said, "I'll be giving it a try then." His 2 hands formed an incantation seal and he flicked his finger. Several red spell seals struck the portrait, causing it to brightly shine with silver light for just a moment. It then faded away as if nothing had occurred. The white-clothed old man hesitantly said, "How strange. It is possible that this is but a simple portrait." After a moment of silence, Marquis Nanlong suggested, "Since that's the case, let's put away the portrait for now. First, let's search for the other treasures first and distribute them. Does anyone have any objections?" The old woman glanced at the portrait and chuckled, "I have no objections. Let's follow fellow Taoist Nanlong's suggestion." Since the others have yet to see the other treasures, they all agreed. As a result, the white-clothed old man rolled the scroll back up and carefully placed it in his storage pouch. As the Marquis looked at the pavilion, he excitedly said, "Let's go into the pavilion and have a look." The party walked around the altar table and arrived in front of the tightly shut pavilion. Marquis Nanlong then impatiently pushed open its gate with a creak. Before Han Li and the others could enter, they were met with a blinding light. It blinded them for a long while before their vision could adjust. Once they could see once more, they spotted 3 slender black wood shelves on the first floor. They were filled with the items that had emitted the dazzling light. The party was instantly filled with joy at the sight. But as each of them were experienced and cunning, they didn't dare to commit any mistaken actions out of greed. With the party restraining their fervent desires, they slowly walked into the pavilion and examined each of the treasures on the shelves. The 3 shelves of treasures were placed in rows at the center of the first floor. They were clearly seen by everyone. The first row had 16 brilliant ancient and magic treasures. The second row had rare materials or all shapes and sizes, from a fist-sized chunk of iron to a blood-red crystal. The third row had the fewest materials. It only consisted of several inch-large bottles. They seemed to contain medicine pills. Han Li expressionlessly swept his gaze past the treasures and maintained a calm appearance. Although the others had maintained a calm appearance as well, none dared to fiddle with the treasures as they pleased. They only appraised the value and uses of each of the magic treasures with their eyes. They would be dividing up the treasures soon. A short moment later, Marquis Nanlong stepped forward and began to examine the treasures on the party's behalf. As for the others, they began to friendly discuss the treasures' origins and applications, but who knew what they were truly thinking? At that moment, Han Li glanced around the room. In addition to the shelves, there was a praying mat and a small, emerald-green plant placed at the window. Han Li's heart stirred. Just as he thought to walk over to them, the white-clothed old man had appeared before the praying mat in a blur. The praying mat flew into his grasp with a wave of his hand, and he began to look over it. Han Li frowned and instead walked over to the small plant by the window, closely examining it. After he began looking over it, he suddenly heard a sweet voice from behind him. "Is Senior Han interested in this yin-focus herb? Although it is rarely seen, it is an optimal ingredient for refining yin-type medicine pills. It is able to increase medicine power without any drawbacks." With an odd expression, he slowly turned around and saw Yan Ruyan standing behind him. Han Li calmly replied, "The yin-focus herb is different from other herbs. Its medicinal properties is strongest only when it is 100 years old. Now that it has reached such a vast age, it no longer has a use." Han Li's gaze swept over the room and found that Wang Chan was closely following after Wang Tiangu. He was excitedly whispering something with his second uncle and wasn't paying any attention to what Yan Ruyan was doing. Yan Ruyan smiled and gazed at Han Li with bright, wandering eyes. "I didn't think that Senior Han was proficient not only in spell formations, but medicine pill refinement as well. You truly have my admiration." Han Li grew greatly vigilant from the woman's eagerness to chat. He bluntly replied, "Pill refinement, only to a minor degree. However, fellow Taoist Yan, do you know of my relationship with your husband? Do you not fear arousing your husband's resentment from speaking with me?" Yan Ruyan's smile faded away, and she said with a helpless tone, "Of course I am aware, but I still vainly hope to dissolve the hatred between Senior and my lord husband." Han Li raised his brow and a sneer flickered on his face. "Dissolve? Your devil Dao sects and my heavenly Dao alliance always had a hostile relationship. What is there to dissolve?" Yan Ruyan bitterly smiled in response and began to speak when Marquis Nanlong suddenly called out, "Come over, fellow Taoists. We will first be distributing the treasures of this floor before heading up." Once this was said, Han Li paid no more heed to Yan Ruyan and walked over. Yan Ruyan's beautiful face flickered with several emotions in response before gracefully following after him. When Wang Chan saw that Yan Ruyan was following after Han Li, he appeared slightly bewildered. But after giving Yan Ruyan a deep glance, he shrewdly decided to keep silent on the matter. As for Wang Tiangu, he turned a blind eye to the matter. Marquis Nanlong had already gathered all the items onto one shelf and calmly said, "All right, let us make clear of the contents. There are 6 ancient treasures, 10 magic treasures, and 8 shares of materials and medicine pills that are organized in accordance to their value. Of course, what everyone wants the most will be the ancient treasures. After all, their full strength can be displayed without any refinement. However, these magic treasures aren't common items either. They were all magic treasures left behind from Master Kang Kun's formidable opponents. Their might should be great. Even if only 70% of their might can be displayed after spending some time to refine them, it will certainly be worth it. As such, you may pick them in accordance to your desires. Fellow Taoists Wang Chan and Yan Ruyan, you will only be allocated one share. The old woman bluntly rushed to take advantage of her age and lay a claim. As old as I am, how do I have the time to refine a magic treasure? It will be an ancient treasure, of course. The others didn't respond to her words, but they wryly laughed in their hearts. At that moment, Wang Tiangu spoke with Marquis Nanlong with a heavy tone. Will fellow Taoists Nanlong and Yun not be taking first pick? There might not be any items you want on the second floor. Marquis Nanlong's expression grew sullen and he coldly said, Brother Wang, what do you mean? The white-clothed old man stared at Wang Tiangu with an unfriendly expression. Wang Tiangu turned a blind eye to this and chuckled. It's nothing. I felt it would just be a pity if you decided to not take first pick with these treasures. With an icy expression, Marquis Nanlong snorted. There is nothing here that fellow Taoist Yun and I wish to take using first priority. As for fellow Taoist Han, it will be his choice to decide whether or not he will use his privilege. He seemed to be greatly displeased with Wang Tiangu's words. Han Li rubbed his chin and casually said, I also don't wish to use my privilege. I'll be keeping it for the second floor. Wang Tiangu spoke without reservation. Since that's the case, we will divide the treasures evenly amongst us. If you want an ancient treasure, then you renounce the right to pick a magic treasures afterwards. Fellow Taoists, do you agree? That method is fine, I agree. That's fine. The others felt this to be fair, and each of them agreed. Of course, Han Li chose to renounce the magic treasures. As for the white-clothed old man and the tan man, they chose to renounce the ancient treasures. Instead, they each took 2 magic treasures and a share of the materials and medicine pills. As for the others, they each took a single ancient treasure. Han Li acquired a bamboo tube. Although he didn't know the level of its power or its abilities, he placed the item into his storage pouch without much care. He also took a share of the medicine pills and materials. Once Han Li and the others each took a single magic treasure, they finished distributing the items on the first floor. As for the praying mat, Han Li noticed that the white-clothed old man had already tossed it to the floor without paying it any further attention. It didn't appear to be valuable. As for the yin-focus herb, it seemed that many had recognized it, but none were interested. Han Li wryly chuckled in his mind. It seemed no one was fool enough to take it. These nascent soul eccentrics had examined everything present. After all, it was quite possible there were hidden treasures. Once these nascent soul eccentrics searched through the first floor once more, the party climbed up to the second floor without any unexpected discoveries. But when they arrived, they were stunned by the sight. As soon as they entered the second floor, they were hit with a wave of incense. There was a small offering shrine at the top of the second floor stairs with a golden statue of a ferocious single-horned demon with 6 arms. It appeared aggressive and lifelike. There was a fire-red cauldron in front of the shrine that was emitting spirals of white smoke. It was the origin of the incense in the air. Marquis Nanlong and the others were shocked to see that Master Kang Kun had enshrined a demon beast. But when Han Li saw the statue, Han Li felt his heart jump. The statue seemed to exactly the same as the demon beast in the sacred provenance plate. It even had the same fierce glare and 6 arms that were all raised to the heavens. Han Li then turned his gaze toward everything else on the second floor. About 10 meters away, he saw a common desk and chair. There was an ink slab, a brush, bamboo slips, and many other items. On the side opposite to the shrine, there was a blue jade bed. Although it was far away, he could faintly sense it emit a frigid aura as if it were carved from glacial jade. On top of the bed, there were 3 jade boxes that appeared rather eye-catching. It seemed the second floor was Master Kang Kun's bedroom. In a blur, the white-clothed old man appeared at the side of the cold jade bed and took one of the jade boxes into his hand. Wait a moment. Soon after this was said, another silhouette appeared at the side of the bed. Their hand began to shine with black light and they pointed it at the old man's back. The white-clothed old man withdrew his wrist and avoided the sneak attack. In his alarmed fury, he glared at his attacker with hostility. What are you doing? You wish to exchange blows with me. The attacker with the fluttering robes was Wang Tiangu. Wang Tiangu calmly said, Brother Yun, please don't be so hasty. I merely wish to confirm whether or not fellow Taoist Yun wished to use his priority selection on this jade box and renounce the privilege on any other items. The white-clothed old man regained his calm, but he glared at Wang Tiangu nonetheless. Naturally, I want to take a look inside first. Why would I choose it if it were useless? Wang Tiangu wore a fearless expression and instead glanced at the 3 jade boxes on the jade bed. He calmly said, "If I remember correctly, we agreed that you two would have first pick, and we would evenly divide what was left over, but doesn't fellow Taoist believe that there will be enough to divide once the jade boxes are taken? What is fellow Taoist planning? Go ahead and say it. Do you plan on reneging on our agreement?" Marquis Nanlong took several steps forward and stood alongside the old man. With a malicious expression, he swept his gaze past the 3 ghost spirit sect cultivators. Wang Tiangu smiled and calmly said, "I have no intention of breaking my promise. However, there are far too few treasures on the 2nd floor to be decided. Since the jade boxes cannot be seen through with spiritual sense, they are probably the most precious items in the building. Perhaps Master Kang Kun's profound cultivation arts or even the secret of Devil Fall Valley lay within. Even under these circumstances, you two fellow Taoists wish to perceive their value before choosing the item. Isn't this excessive?" The white-clothed old man, "Excessive? I only recall that you fellow Taoists personally agreed to our conditions of priority selection. What does it have to do with us if there aren't enough items here?" The old woman surprisingly backed Wang Tiangu. "Those words can't be said. Fellow Taoists are allowed to have first pick with the items, but they can't examine what are within the boxes. If fellow Taoists are unsure, they may pick another item. For example, this glacial jade bed is a rather rare treasure. To cultivators with yin ice cultivation arts, it is a vastly precious treasure." Once that was said, Marquis Nanlong's expression became gloomy. He suddenly emitted an immense pressure that forced Wang Tiangu and the old woman to take a step back. At nascent soul stage, the difference in power between early and mid-stage wasn't something to underestimate. Marquis Nanlong narrowed his eyes and swept his gaze past the rest of the party with eyes as cold as a sword's edge. If there is anyone who believes fellow Taoist Wang's words to be reasonable, step forward. For Brother Wang to act so boldly, he should more than just Madame Tai supporting him. After a moment of silence, the Tan cultivator calmly said, "Marquis Nanlong, there is no need to be angry. Brother Wang's words aren't without reason. Fellow Taoist can't just leave us with scraps." As for the stern-faced cultivator, he unconsciously frowned and hesitantly stood behind Wang Tiangu as if forgetting of their unfriendly relationship. Suddenly, apart from Han Li, the 2 parties stood in confrontation. Marquis Nanlong and the white-clothed old man's expressions vastly changed. Marquis Nanlong instantly regained his calm and asked, "It seems you've formed a group beforehand. Just when have you decided this? You shouldn't have had the opportunity on the way here." Wang Tiangu nonchalantly said, "It is impossible to have formed a group all at once. These fellow Taoists and I had a small meeting before we left. We talked about a few plans of self-preservations as well as any unexpected circumstances. This was one of the situations that we had anticipated. We now have no option but to fight against fellow Taoists Nanlong and Yun." Marquis Nanlong's expression grew icy. His gaze soon landed on Han Li and he gravely asked, "Fellow Taoist Han, what will you do?" As of current, the 2 mid-nascent soul cultivators were standing in confrontation against 4 early nascent soul cultivators and 2 late core formation cultivators. From the balance of power, Han Li, who had yet to pick a side, had become a crucial point to the conflict. Han Li didn't immediately choose. He merely turned his head and calmly looked at Wang Tiangu's party, attempting to read their expressions the best he could. Not only did Wang Tiangu look at Han Li with a calm expression, but he also calmly smiled, revealing not a trace of worry. At his side, Wang Chan appeared excited and Yan Ruyan appeared to be at a loss. They didn't seem to know that Wang Tiangu and the others had formed an alliance beforehand. Lady Tai and the stern-faced cultivator didn't reveal the slightest alarm. They merely glanced at Han Li with an emotionless gaze. Han Li's heart thumped. He felt that something was amiss and he grew greatly vigilant. He casually took several steps away from either party and smiled. "I don't have an opinion. Regardless of whatever the outcome fellow Taoist Wang or Brother Nanlong decides, I will not oppose it." Marquis Nanlong wasn't surprised by Han Li's words. Han Li had always displayed a neutral attitude. The question was merely verifying what the Marquis already suspected. Marquis Nanlong's expression relaxed and he nodded to Han Li. His gaze then turned towards Wang Tiangu and he coldly smiled as if about to speak. But at that moment, the white-clothed old man suddenly took a step forward and icily said, "Brother Nanlong, for what reason are you talking to them? Do these people truly believe that they will be able to cause us to succeed by joining hands? Delusional. Once this was said, he opened his mouth and spat out a shining white magic treasure. Fellow Taoist Yun, wait, I am. You. Marquis Nanlong frowned and thought to stop the old man's rash actions as their changes of victory weren't entirely certain. They didn't expect that the old man would suddenly command the silver wheel to fly in his direction. A muffled ping sounded out. Under Marquis Nanlong's incredulous gaze, the silver wheel tore through the golden light protecting his body and directly struck his chest. Not only was he forced to take several steps back, but there was also a depression left in his chest. Marquis Nanlong responded with furious alarm. He flung his sleeve and shot a small golden blade from his palm towards the old man. But at that moment the old man blurred and appeared at Wang Tiangu's side. He had raised his hand and commanded the silver wheel to block the golden sword. He then coldly glanced at Marquis Nanlong's chest. Beneath his torn robes, there was a layer of shining azure cloth armor. Although it had a deep depression, it was still in one piece. The old man's expression flickered and he expressionlessly muttered, "Azure rhino armor. As expected, you wore it on hand." Marquis Nanlong's cheek began to appear dark red and he stroked his chest, staring at the old man as he furiously spoke. "Good, very good. I didn't expect you to have been bought by them." Although their view was obstructed by blinding light, all could see that he was seriously injured. The old man ignored Marquis Nanlong as if he were a stranger and said, "Fellow Taoists, be careful. Do not let him leave this place alive. With his cultivation, we will attract no small amount of trouble." The stern-faced cultivator sinisterly smiled. "Relax, we have so many people on our side, and he is seriously injured. It will be impossible for him to escape." He then spat out a misty white flying saber from his mouth. At that moment, Wang Tiangu turned his head to Han Li and amiably said, "Fellow Taoist Han, if you help us deal with him, you'll receive a portion of his treasure. How about it?" He spoke sincerely as if ignoring the past hostilities that Han Li and Wang Chan shared. "Help you?" The previous scene came as a great shock to Han Li, and his expression vastly changed. His eyes then turned towards the stairs. In the instant the old man attacked Marquis Nanlong, the old woman has silently guarded the staircase. Otherwise, Han Li would have already made his escape. Since the walls of the pavilion were flickering with white light, it was clear that it was under the effects of some formidable restriction and would be incapable of being broken through. Han Li didn't trust Wang Tiangu's proposal to group together. Surely Han Li would be next after Marquis Nanlong was eliminated. They would have extended the offer to Han Li to join hands beforehand were this not the case. He reckoned that from the very start, it had been decided for Han Li to die alongside Marquis Nanlong. With that thought, Han Li's expression remained calm as he attempted to agree with them for the time being. However, Marquis Nanlong scoffed and said, "Fellow Taoist Han, you can't honestly believe such a shallow trick. Although I don't know what methods fellow Taoist Wang used to entice the lot of them, my good friend of 100 years included, there is hope for survival if we join hands. But if we allow them to deal with us separately, we will certainly meet our doom." As Marquis Nanlong spoke, he brushed his hand past his chest. In a pulse of soft white light, the depression in the armor was restored back to normal. Wang Tiangu and the others were surprised, but the white-clothed old man calmly explained, "There is no need to be worried. He is merely using a secret technique to temporarily suppress his injuries. There is still lasting damage, but he will be troublesome together with that youngster Han. Have someone tangle him down for the time being. Kill Marquis Nanlong first." Once the old man finished, he unhurriedly pointed the silver wheel in front of him. The magic treasure immediately turned into a silver streak above his head. A mist of white light spread around his body, causing him to appear indistinct. Knowing that Marquis Nanlong held a bone-deep grudge against him, he wasn't about to hold back in the slightest. Wang Tiangu frowned and felt that this was reasonable. He turned his head to the stern-faced cultivator and said, "Brother Long, deal with that youngster for a moment. You don't need to try your hardest to kill him, just keep him occupied. After we deal with Marquis Nanlong, we'll kill him together." Wang Tiangu icily glared at Han Li and no longer contained his killing intent. His body suddenly emitted a meter-tall black radiance, completely enveloping him in darkness. When the old woman and the tan cultivator saw this, they each spat out their magic tools in preparation. The stern-faced cultivator chuckled and silently slipped out a milky white jade scepter from his sleeve. He then took several steps forward and mysteriously smiled at Han Li. "Not a problem. I'll deal with fellow Taoist Han." From his point of view, holding down a cultivator that had just entered nascent soul stage was a trivial affair. It was far safer than attempting to confront a mid-nascent soul cultivator. Han Li stared at the stern-faced cultivator and remained entirely still, but when he saw that the old woman had left the stairwell, his heart began to heavily thump. He tightly grabbed onto the ancient treasure that was hidden in his sleeve. At that moment, Marquis Nanlong swept his sleeve and sent out a mist of gold, sweeping the 3 jade boxes on the bed into his grasp. "Take it." Marquis Nanlong tossed one of the jade boxes to Han Li without any hesitation. This action was greatly unexpected, and none attempted to block it. Han Li easily caught the jade box with slight confusion on his face. With his arms behind his back, Marquis Nanlong explained, "Since fellow Taoist isn't following their wretched actions, I will give this jade box to you. If the box truly contains the secrets of Devil Fall Valley and fellow Taoist is able to make it out alive, it can be considered a fated chance." When the others heard this, their expressions vastly changed. Han Li glanced down at the jade box in his hand and licked his lips. He inwardly felt a desire to howl with laughter, but he managed to retain his calm with his exceeding force of will. The item that all the cultivators presently wished to acquire had fallen right into his hands. He found it hilarious. Of course, Marquis Nanlong hadn't done this out of kindness. Since the other side were determined to acquire the jade boxes, he gave a jade box to Han Li in order to divert their attention and create an opportunity for himself to escape. Marquis Nanlong was quite a decisive and formidable character to abandon a treasure that was already in his possess. But once Han Li realized that very treasure was in his hands, he couldn't help but inwardly laugh. Han Li flipped his hand without a thought and placed it away in a storage pouch. Wang Tianguo's expression grew sullen and he decisively ordered, "Channer, assist fellow Taoist Long with Ruyan. Do not allow that youngster Han the opportunity to escape. The others and I will be enough for the Marquis." He appeared calm, and his reason wasn't overturned by his desire for the jade box. He merely sent the weakest among them to look after Han Li and paid him no more heed. When the others saw this, they grew tempted, but they all knew that so long as they could kill Marquis Nanlong first, Han Li was as good as theirs. "Yes, second uncle, I was already thinking of it." Wang Chan's eyes revealed a malicious expression, and he sinisterly smiled. He then beckoned to Yan Ruyan and walked towards Han Li. A complicated expression flickered on Yan Ruyan's face for a moment, and she silently followed after him. Han Li calmly glanced at the two, without the slightest change in emotion. Han Li found it rather laughable. Although weapons were at the ready, the battle had yet to start on the other side. It wasn't due to any lingering sentiments, but due to caution. With Marquis Nanlong now a cornered beast, there was a change he might steel his resolve and decide to take one or two with them in mutual destruction. With the fear of a counterattack from a mid-nascent soul on death's door, they were each unwilling to be the first to strike in fear of receiving a fatal counterattack. Moreover, they weren't in the slightest rush. With Marquis Nanlong's wounds only worsening with time, the advantage laid with them. But bafflingly, Marquis Nanlong stood motionlessly in place as if he were unconcerned with his injuries. However, his red complexion was only growing brighter, nearly becoming the same shade as blood itself. This only caused Wang Tianguo and the others to appear more hesitant. In fear that the Marquis would employ a secret technique to muster the entirety of his strength, they each gazed at him from a distance with icy gazes. As for the stern-faced cultivator, he didn't take the initiative to attack Han Li. His only goal was to tie him down. While Wang Chan held only the desire to kill Han Li as soon as possible, he lacked the cultivation to act. As such, the entire building was entirely peaceful, despite the profuse killing intent that was present. A short moment later, Han Li wore a pensive expression and sighed. Although he wasn't loud, it was noticed by everyone present. As each of the nascent soul eccentrics in the building were shrewd and cunning, none of them turned their attention to Han Li apart from the stern-faced cultivator. As for Wang Chan, he curled his lips and sneered. From their point of view, Han Li could only take action after Marquis Nanlong. It was only in that case he could take advantage of the chaos to escape. Nobody believed that Han Li would take action after he sighed. Han Li calmly raised his hand and revealed a pitch-black item in his hand. Marquis Nanlong narrowed his eyes. Before he could even see what it was, he flung it into the air without any reservation. It spun in a circle before instantaneously expanding to the size of 25 meters, forming what seemed to be a wall between both sides of the conflict. When the stern-faced cultivator clearly saw the pitch-black mountain, he didn't know what treasure it was. While he was surprised, he he managed to react and pointed to the Jade Scepter in front of him. In an instant, the Jade Scepter loudly hummed and brightly shined with white light. A huge white tiger then materialized from the radiance. Although the tiger appeared indistinct, it bared its ferocious fangs as soon as it appeared and instantly shot a beam of blazing white light towards the Black Mountain. With a loud rumble, the white light instantly engulfed a majority of the mountain. Wang Chan also reacted. He formed an incantation gesture with his hands, engulfing his body in a crimson mist. In that same moment, the stench of blood filled the air. As for Yan Ruyan, she also formed an incantation gesture and enveloped herself in crimson mist. However, she emitted an odd fragrance rather than the scent of blood. A whiff of it would cause one's mind to become dizzy and muddled. The stern-faced cultivator felt some relief at this. As he willed the white tiger to spit out another beam of light with his jade scepter, he slapped his storage pouch with his other hand, summoning an inch-large, faint blue gourd into his hand. Just as he was about to deploy the gourd, he suddenly heard a faint roll of thunder. In his alarm, he formed a hand incantation without any hesitation and formed a dense light barrier around him. At nearly that same time, a flash of silver lightning appeared at his side, revealing Han Li with silver wings emerging from his back. "Ah, you!" The stern-faced cultivator was greatly shocked, but as a result of his rich combat experience, he hastily raised the gourd in his hand and shot out a dazzling bolt of blue lightning. In the instant the blue lightning shot out, Han Li didn't dodge. Rather, he blankly opened his mouth, spitting out a thread of blue flame. The blue flames pierced through the white light barrier without the slightest resistance and shot towards the stern-faced cultivator. The meager wisp of blue flame was able to pass through the light barrier unobstructed, much to the surprise of the stern-faced cultivator. Lacking any time to dodge, the wisp of flame struck his neck. With a crackle, the stern-faced cultivator was entirely consumed by blue ice, forming a glistening ice sculpture. Much to the stern-faced cultivator's misfortune, Han Li had particularly directed the celestial ice flames to strike at his neck as a result of his experience from fighting the spell warrior. With his head frozen over, he had no opportunity to cast any techniques and change the outcome. In the same moment Han Li turned the stern-faced man into an ice sculpture, the blue lightning from the gourd struck Han Li before its thunder could sound out. But before it could strike Han Li's body, a net of faint gold lightning suddenly appeared on Han Li's body. In a flicker of golden light, the blue lightning was absorbed and disappeared from sight. Han Li then hesitantly reached forward and quickly snatched away the blue gourd. Han Li's use of the thunderstorm wings, the icing of the stern-faced cultivator surnamed Long, and the acquisition of the treasure took place in a mere instant. Just as Wang Chan had thought to step forward and assist the stern-faced cultivator, he witnessed his instantaneous defeat. Wang Chan could hardly believe what he just saw. When Han Li coldly glanced in his direction, Wang Chan responded without a thought. With fear in his voice, he yelled, "Cast together. Use the blood spirit arts to restrain him." Once that was said, he grabbed onto Yan Ruyan's hand and hurriedly uttered an incantation. Crimson mist suddenly spread through the air. Yan Ruyan didn't resist, merely displaying a trace of disgust deep within her eyes. After a moment of hesitation, she followed suit and uttered an incantation. The blood mist from both of their bodies combined as one and condensed into a mist of violet blood light. After Wang Chan and Yan Ruyan disappeared into the violet mist, it began to release ghostly howls, as if monsters truly laid within. When Han Li saw this, he faintly smirked. Marquis Nanlong suddenly sent Han Li a voice transmission. "Good. I didn't expect for fellow Taoist Han to possess such heaven-defying abilities. If we join hands, we may be able to match them." When Han Li heard this, he swept his gaze to the other side. Marquis Nanlong and the others had yet to fight, but the others were staring at him with absolute shock. Marquis Nanlong appeared delighted by Han Li's recent display, and his hopes of escaping grew stronger. Marquis Nanlong immediately said, "So long as you join hands with me, I am willing to give you another jade box." "Join hands, haha." Han Li coldly laughed and said nothing. He carried no such desire. He clearly understood that he was able to easily dispatch of the stern-faced cultivator because he was unaware of the deadly celestial ice flames. Else, the battle would have taken far longer, even if he ended up victorious. There were still 3 early and 1 mid-nascent soul cultivators on the opposing side. If Marquis Nanlong was uninjured, they might have stood a chance, but as gravely wounded as he was now, Han Li would only be dragged down alongside him. Regardless of whatever it may contain, the Jade box's contents wasn't worth his life. Before he fled, he needed to have them start fighting and have their focus be on the Marquis. Otherwise, their attentions would be focused on him, and it would be difficult for him to escape. With that thought, Han Li paid them no further heed and flapped his wings, leaving only thunder behind. When the white-clothed old man saw this, he immediately shouted, "Not good. He's about to run, block him. Don't let him escape with the Jade box." With the scene of Han Li instantly killing a similar grade cultivator still fresh in their minds, the old woman and the tan man ignored his words entirely. Even Wang Tiangu appeared hesitant. He couldn't decide whether to take action. After all, if Han Li truly left, they would be able to deal with the Marquis with complete certainty. The two Jade boxes may as well be theirs. But if they were to forcefully detain Han Li with his strange abilities, even the mid-nascent soul old man might not be able to prevail over him. It was far too risky. However, the Jade box in Han Li's grasp might contain the secrets of Devilfall Valley that they all so deeply desired. As shrewd and cunning as Wang Tiangu was, he found himself wavering between two extremely difficult choices. When the white-clothed old man saw their hesitation, he understood them perfectly. He also felt some fear towards Han Li's celestial ice flames. Moreover, if he were to leave this place to deal with Han Li, the Marquis may escape. Although Marquis Nanlong's injuries were severe, 3 early nascent soul cultivators didn't have much hope of remaining steadfast against his formidable secret techniques. He also found himself hesitant as to what to do. In a flash of lightning, Han Li appeared at the top of the stairs. He strangely smiled at Wang Tiangu and company before pointing to the Black Mountain. The Black Mountain trembled and disappeared in an instant, only to appear above them and dropping down with all its might. None had expected that Han Li would launch such a sudden attack, to their fury. However, even the white-clothed old man didn't dare to take on the mountain's might alone. They could only helplessly dodge out of the way as the mountain fell down. This was finally the moment Marquis Nanlong chose to strike. His eyes brightened and he transformed into a blinding streak of golden light, charging directly towards the old woman. In her fright, the old woman's body flashed with yellow light, summoning a small yellow shield to block the Marquis' approach. In an instant, gold and yellow light intertwined, but eventually the golden light engulfed the old woman. When the others saw this, they instantly struck without any further thought and attempted to restrain the Marquis. But through some unknown secret technique, the golden light on his body became increasingly dense. At that same moment, he released several powerful ancient treasures to enter the fray. He didn't appear to be at the slightest disadvantage in this chaotic battle. The others were completely occupied in their alarm and couldn't pay any attention to Han Li's actions. When Han Li saw this, he was satisfied and pointed once more to the Black Mountain. It shrunk to several inches in a gust of wind and shot back into his hand. He then turned his gaze towards the violet blood mist with a stern expression on his face. With pupils glowing with blue light, Han Li gazed at a certain portion of the mist. He raised his hand without any hesitation, and black light began to surge through it. A dense mass of black-red light shot out from his palm towards the mist, discharging the Yin Devil execution. A wretched scream came from the blood mist, but Han Li had already disappeared with a flash of lightning. Even if Wang Chan somehow managed to survive the strike, his injuries would be grave. While he did wish to take advantage of this opportunity to ensure Wang Chan's death, he was certain that Wang Tiangu would come to Wang Chan's aid. When that moment came, he would be tied down in a battle against Wang Tiangu, attracting much danger onto himself. In any case, Han Li would always have the ability to kill a trifling late-core formation cultivator like Wang Chang, so he had no need to risk his safety now. As such, he immediately fled after making his attack. Han Li's figure appeared at the exit of the building in a blur, and he flew straight towards the hall's entrance. Along the way, a white streak of light flew into Han Li's sleeve from the corner of the hall. It appeared to be a small white fox. "Master I," Silvermoon spoke with an excited tone. Han Li flew straight out the hall and gloomily interrupted, "Now is not the time to talk. Leave it for when we're out of danger." When Han Li broke through the wondrous soul restriction, he deliberately used a flash of dazzling light to hide a gap in the restriction that he created. In that instant, he had Silvermoon go through. Afterwards, he deliberately stalled for time as he dissolved the formation. It was for this reason that Han Li had taken such efforts to break through the wondrous soul restriction, not on the mere basis of priority selection. From how excited Silvermoon appeared, it seemed she had reaped quite a bit of profit from the pavilion. Having taken the initiative to seize the treasures, Han Li had refused Marquis Nanlong's proposal to fight together and simply chose to prioritize his own escape. In the instant Han Li shot through the entrance of the hall, he felt an earth-shaking rumble from behind him. Alarmed, Han Li hastily turned his gaze around. He saw that the Jade Pavilion suddenly ruptured to reveal a blazing golden sun that was 3 meters wide. It flew out from rubble, carrying a faint silhouette. It appeared Marquis Nanlong had executed some sort of secret technique. Han Li was shaken by the sight. The Jade Pavilion wasn't an ordinary building. Han Li doubted his own ability to break through its walls, but Marquis Nanlong was able to turn it into rubble in a single blow. It seemed the full might of a nascent soul cultivator wasn't a simple matter in the least. With his attention back to the matter at hand, Han Li flew into the center of the hall and glanced at the restored walls around him. He raised his hand without any further thought and flickered his finger. A meter-long streak of sword light flew out from his hand and struck the opposing wall. A rough hole was cut in the wall. Then in a flash of white light, the hole disappeared without a trace. Han Li frowned. Just as he thought of another method to break it, his expression suddenly changed and he turned around in an instantaneous blur. Marquis Nanlong was standing there about 10 meters behind him. His body was glaring with dazzling golden light, but his complexion was deathly pale. Han Li's eyes gazed past him towards the pavilion. He simply saw that a huge dome of golden light was covering the pavilion. Occasional flashes of black and white light could be seen within, along with the faint sounds of explosions. A trace of shock appeared on Han Li's face. Through the use of some sort of heaven-defying technique, he managed to trap the others inside for the time being, giving him the time to escape. The outer restrictions need to be opened with the formation flag. Fellow Taoist Han, since I only have a single formation flag, it will take some more time. I will have to trouble you to delay them. Although the might of my ancient treasure may be great, I don't know how much longer they will be trapped. They could break out at any moment. Marquis Nanlong forced a smile and flipped his hand. He held a small fluttering yellow flag in his hand and began to mutter incantations without delay. It appeared he didn't have the slightest fear of Han Li attacking him. Han Li's gaze flickered and he quickly slapped his storage pouch. An emerald green formation plate appeared in his hand, the magic tool that he had used to break through the wondrous soul restriction. He quickly drew several azure talisman characters into the air and blew them onto the formation plate, causing it to brightly shine with azure light. Han Li formed an incantation gesture with his hands and softly shouted, "Rise!" Apart from the side that Marquis Nanlong was facing, the walls turned back to blue crystal, sealing off the hall once more. Marquis Nanlong ceased his incantation at the sight and joyfully said, "You are able to control the wondrous soul formation." Revealing not a trace of pride, Han Li sullenly said, "I'm not even capable of mustering even a tenth of its original power. It won't be able to hold them for long either. Brother Nanlong had best open the way before they break through." When Marquis Nanlong heard this, he discovered that the crystal walls were far darker than they were originally, and his expression of joy suddenly vanished. He then tossed the small flag, having it disappear into the wall in a trace of light before continuing with his incantation. At that same moment, he heard deafening rumbles from behind him and saw that the crystal walls had begun to sparkle. The thunderous explosions were clear to hear. It seems they've managed to break through the Marquis' ancient treasure and have begun their attack on the crystal walls. Han Li glanced at the stone wall and saw it was faintly glowing with white light before turning his gaze back to the blue crystal walls. After some slight hesitation, he tossed a spirit beast pouch into the air, summoning a swarm of black-tainted gold-devouring beetles. With the formation of an incantation gesture, the beetles swarmed frantically surrounded Han Li and transformed into tricolored armor. An odd expression momentarily appeared on the Marquis' face when he saw Han Li executing the insect armor technique. But since their need for escape was urgent, he left the matter alone. A short moment later, the crystal walls violently trembled as if on the verge of collapse. Likewise, the stone wall also began to shake in part amongst the white light, revealing the stairway ahead of them. As soon as Marquis Nanlong saw this, his body pulsed in golden light and he shot out. Behind him, Han Li's thunderstorm wings flapped with golden lightning and suddenly disappeared from sight. A moment later, Han Li appeared in front of Marquis Nanlong and appeared in midair. But soon, he saw a clear explosion from down below. With an expression of alarm, Han Li flapped his thunderstorm wings once more, and he instantly arrived at the exit of the stairs. Afterwards, he employed his lightning movement to its fullest extent and began to flicker into the distance. Just as Han Li flew a kilometer away, an ear-piercing cry came from the stairs, followed by a ball of blinding golden light streaking across the sky. The Marquis flew once around and announced in an icy, resentful tone, "Take this to heart. You had best avoid falling into my hands or I will exterminate both your body and soul." Once this oath was finished, his golden light gleamed and began to appear indistinct. Just as a silver light shot out from the mountain entrance, the golden radiance suddenly turned exceptionally slim and flickered several times before tearing through the sky at an immense speed. In nearly a single breath, it had disappeared from sight. At that moment, Han Li was already on the edge of the sky, appearing as an intermittently flickering dot. Closely following the silver light, a streak of black light faded away to reveal a silhouette. Wang Tiangu solemnly asked, "What movement techniques are they using to travel so quickly?" Silver light faded away to reveal the white-clothed old man. He gloomily said, "Marquis Nanlong is using a secret technique that was personally created by Master Kang Kun, Milished Line. By consuming vast amounts of vitality and blood essence, one is able to instantly travel into a distance in light as thin as a thread. It makes their aura entirely hidden so that they cannot be tracked. While he truly hasn't traveled too far away, it will be impossible to detect him with spiritual sense. As for that youngster Han, he seems to be controlling lightning through use of those strange wings. It should be the instant lightning movement of legend." At that moment, the old woman and the tan cultivator both shot out from the passage and heard of the old man's words. With a pale and uneasy expression, the old woman asked, "Given how fantastic their movement techniques are, they'll be able to make a clean escape. What should we do?" The tan cultivator now appeared in complete disarray. "That youngster Han is of little consequence, but if Marquis Nanlong escapes, it will be great cause for trouble. Fellow Taoists Wang and Yun, we only agreed to collude against Marquis Nanlong because of you two." The old man coldly chuckled and sinisterly said, "Be at ease. From the beating he received, what do you think his true cultivation is now? From forcefully drawing magic power in his injured state to using the Milished Line, he will certainly be gravely injured without any further action. Even if he spent the next 100 years restoring his vitality, he won't be able to preserve his mid-nascent soul stage cultivation. Moreover, when did I ever say I didn't have a way of tracking him down?" With roused spirits, the tan man suddenly asked, "Brother Yun means?" The old man readily said, "Since I planned to kill him, it is only natural that I prepared for this ahead of time. So long as he isn't able to move 150 kilometers in a single stretch, I will be able to find him. But given the current state of his body, he won't be able to sustain the Milished Line for long. When that time comes, we'll track him down and dispose of him." The old woman's expression relaxed and she sighed. "That's good. This is greatly reassuring. Were it not for the black jade lotus that fellow Taoist Wang gave to me and the promise of sharing the secrets of Devil Fall Valley with us, I definitely wouldn't have braved such dangers. Becoming enemies with a mid-nascent soul cultivator isn't a wise decision." The tan cultivator also appeared relieved and he said, "We spent quite a bit of effort for the secrets of Devil Fall Valley. However, we didn't expect that fellow Taoist Yun was actually an elder for the Ghost Spirit Sect. How surprising. Could it be that the 6 Devil Tao sects have so many hidden elders?" Once he finished speaking, a complicated expression appeared on his face. The white-clothed old man shook his head and insipidly said, "Although I came from the Ghost Spirit Sect in my youth, I wasn't very involved with sect affairs. Thus, only a few know of my true identity as a Ghost Spirit Sect elder. I didn't truly have the intention to deceive any others. To tell the truth, Marquis Nanlong was a descendant of Master Kang Kun and had been my friend for many years. I didn't wish to kill him. But it is a pity that I discovered he stealthily formed friendships with the elders of the righteous Tao Heaven Peak sect and grew interested in joining their sect. I urged him to change his mind, but his mind was unchanged. Furthermore, he planned to draw support of the Heaven Peak sect to enter Devil Fall Valley. As such, I couldn't just stand by and allow the righteous Tao to grow in power. I had no option but to deal with him." With a slight surprise, the old woman asked, "Marquis Nanlong has ties with the Heaven Peak sect. Fellow Taoist Yun, you didn't mention this matter before." As for the tan cultivator, he appeared furious. The white-clothed old man surnamed Yun smiled and calmly said, "I didn't mention the matter. You just carelessly overlooked the matter. However, Marquis Nanlong truly hasn't yet entered the Heaven Peak sect. If you are feeling worried, you can join my sect and become elders. That way, the Heaven Peak sect won't be able to touch you." The old woman coldly snorted, "Given my age, I have no interest receiving further constraints." The Tan cultivator frowned and indifferently said, I am accustomed to being without responsibilities and also have no interest in joining your sect. That is truly a pity. If you were to join our ghost spirit sect, our prestige would soar. The old man didn't mind their refusals and changed the topic. I won't insist on having you two join. So long as Marquis Nanlong is killed here, the Heaven Peak sect won't take the initiative to make any trouble on behalf of a dead man. It is just unfortunate that despite being friends with him for 100 years, he hadn't told me his intentions with regards to Devilfall Valley. I only knew that there was a secret cave residence here and that there was a map of Devilfall Valley that was left behind by Master Kang Kun. As such, we won't exterminate his nascent soul when we capture him. I will first use a soul scouring technique and see if he possesses any useful information. Wang Tiangu worriedly said, if by chance the map was in the box that youngster Han made off with, wouldn't we be helpless? Old Man Yun slowly said, that can be dealt with. If this comes to happen, we'll leak this matter to all the sects in the Heavenly South. When that time comes, even the Heavenly Tao Alliance will wish to pursue this matter, let alone the righteous and devilish Tao, creating an opportunity for us to profit in the chaos. Let's see how a sect as trifling as the Drifting Cloud sect deals with the greed of wishing to monopolize the gains from Devilfall Valley. In addition to the map, I am also interested in any information Marquis Nanlong may have on Devilfall Valley. With this information, we'll be a step ahead even if the method of entering Devilfall Valley became widespread. After a moment of thought, Wang Tiangu proposed, if it somehow turns out that way, that will be all we can do. But before that, he could try trading for the map. After all, even if he bears great resentment against us, there are few matters in this world that can't be traded for. Junior Marshal Brother Wang's proposal is preferable to my own, the old man then sighed and muttered. Nevertheless, the youngster's abilities are truly bizarre. Is he truly around the same age as Junior Marshal Nephew Wang? From that last battle, the cunning he displayed was greater than even ours, and he was even able to defeat fellow Taoist Long. If I were to fight him alone, I too doubt my own ability to hold against him. Wang Tiangu's eyes flickered, and a trace of vexation appeared on his face. I asked Wang Chan about him before. It seemed this person was an ordinary Yellow Maple Valley cultivator. At the time, he was truly but a foundation establishment cultivator. His vast accomplishments in cultivation and ability are something of a mystery. Were it not for his abilities being contrary to expectation and his meddling, we would have been able to easily dispose of Marquis Nanlong. When the old woman and the others heard this, they could only wryly smile. Wang Tiangu suggested, with that being said, let's first head back and free fellow Taoist Long. With his cultivation, he should be able to survive being frozen. Also, I am concerned for my nephew. Before that youngster Han departed, he released a blood-red light that appeared similar to the devil blood cleave that I personally cultivate. I don't know how well Channer was able to receive it. The old man replied, that's fine. Since we don't have any method of detecting him for the time being, let's go take a look at them. We'll carry out the pursuit once Marquis Nanlong is no longer capable of carrying out the Mylish line. In the next moment, the party flew back into the mountain. The party arrived at the ruins of the Jade Pavilion once more to see a bewildered Yan Ruyan. She was crouching near Wang Chan, who laid motionlessly on the floor. When Wang Tiangu saw this, he asked with an icy tone, what happened? Were any of Channer's vitals struck? Even now, Wang Tiangu still displayed exceptional calmness. Wearing a slightly anxious expression, Yan Ruyan hesitantly replied, no, but his leg. Wang Tiangu took several steps forward and tensely frowned. He saw that both of Wang Chan's legs were missing from below their knees, but strangely enough, there wasn't a hint of blood. Yan Ruyan helplessly said, Lord Husband and I had joined hands to cast the blood spirit art's blood mist, but we were instantly attacked by some sort of strange technique. The blood mist was incapable of blocking it, and my Lord Husband had dodged too late. His legs were. Wang Tiangu gloomily asked, since this is the case, then why aren't you using any techniques to recover his legs? You should know such a technique. With a tense brow, Yan Ruyan timidly said, I've attempted to restore his legs several times now, but the techniques aren't responding in the slightest. Although his wounds didn't shed any blood, a black chi condensed around the wound and it can't be driven off. It could be the reason why the healing technique failed and why he is unconscious. Wang Tiangu's expression relaxed and he began to concentrate his gaze on Wang Chan's wounds. It can't have been a common attack that struck you. Let me take a look. Wang Chan's wounds were covered in faint black chi as expected. Wang Tiangu lifted his hands, and his fingers flickered with black light as he grabbed the harmful qi from one of the legs, gathering it into a pea-sized black ball on his finger. He thought to dispose of the harmful qi with true fire, but after some thought, he slapped his storage pouch and wrapped the ball of black qi with spiritual power before placing it in a jade bottle. Once it was properly taken care of, he casually placed it away. It seemed Wang Tiangu planned on examining this item for further understanding of Han Li's techniques. When Yan Ruyan saw that Wang Tiangu paid her no heed, a complicated expression momentarily appeared on her face before disappearing without a trace. Once Wang Tiangu took care of the black qi on the other leg, Yan Ruyan silently made another attempt to restore his limbs. Wang Tiangu nodded his head with satisfaction and turned his attention to the other side. The white-clothed old man and the others were at a loss as they stood around the ice-clad body of the stern-faced cultivator. Wang Tiangu walked towards them and bafflingly asked, "What? You fellow Taoists aren't able to free him?" A trace of fear appeared on the old woman's expression. She muttered, "Free him? How? This ice is far more insidious than we could have imagined." The old man simply kept silent as he wore a gloomy expression on his face. "What is that supposed to mean?" Wang Tiangu turned his gaze to the ice-clad body and began to ponder. "Brother Wang, take a good look." The tan cultivator suddenly raised his hand and flung a fist-sized chunk of jade towards the ice-clad body. Blue light flashed upon impact, and the jade chunk was instantly covered in blue ice before dissolving into countless specks of fading glitter. The tan man remained still as he stood 3 meters away and pointed at the ice-clad body. Scorching white true fire shot towards the ice from his finger, but in the moment the true fire touched the blue ice, it disappeared in a flash of light as if it were absorbed. Wang Tiangu felt his breath turn cold. The old man sighed and asked, "This blue ice is vicious. It seems that fellow Taoist Long's body has long died. It seems we can only have his nascent soul manifest and find a suitable body to possess. Didn't fellow Taoist Long already possess a body once before?" The tan man appeared to be familiar with the stern-faced cultivator and sullenly said, "No, this was his original body." The old man nodded his head and said, "That's good. Now we just need to have fellow Taoist Long manifest his nascent soul." As if having heard this, the stern-faced cultivator's body shined with white light. Then with a muffled bang, his entire body turned to ash and faded away. All that remained in the blue ice was an inch-large nascent soul. It was clasping onto a thumb-sized jade ornament in his hand, and its face was filled with resentment. It opened its small mouth and spouted out fire-red vital nascent flames onto the jade ornament in its hands. It then raised it above its head and suddenly surrounded its body in red-white flame. Without any further delay, he attempted to charge straight out. "Wait," the old man seemed to think of something and hastily attempted to stop this, but he spoke too late. The nascent soul passed through the ice. What resulted afterwards sent chills down their spine. The formidable white-red flames had seemed to have been set alight by the ice, engulfing both the white-red flames and the nascent soul in blue fire. The white-red flames were instantly consumed by the blue fire, resulting in the deathly wail of the nascent soul. It turned frantic as it charged through the air. After flying about 50 meters away, it attempted to roll and exterminate the flames as it wildly howled in pain. A short moment later, the screams came to an abrupt stop, and the nascent soul was refined in a ball of light that faded away. The cultivator surnamed Long was now dead in both soul and body. Through use of lightning movement, Han Li was able to travel 50 kilometers in a single stretch. He then paused for a moment before gaining his bearings and swapped to using the blood-red cloak before continuing on his flight as a streak of crimson light. After flying 500 kilometers out, he spotted a Mulan tribe that consisted of tens of thousands of mortals. He stopped with faint excitement brimming in his heart. While he was at the Drifting Cloud Sect, the topic of the war with the Mulan spell warriors and Heavenly South cultivators had come up during a conversation with his fellow sect elders. Although the ordinary mortals from the Mulan tribes couldn't cultivate spirit techniques, during times of war, the Mulan spell warriors would organize many temporary parties of mortals to seize the spirit stone mines and material sources that the Heavenly South cultivators were too occupied to attend to. As such, the Mulan spell warriors wouldn't return empty-handed once they eventually retreated. Of course, the Nine Nations Union were well aware of the looting, but they couldn't afford to look after these resources as war was waged. If they had too few cultivators to guard these areas, it was possible that they would be wiped out by any high-grade cultivators that the Mulan would send. If there were too many cultivators, it would be to the detriment of the main battlefield. The only feasible option was to wait until after these areas were seized and recapture them afterwards. The Mulan mortals would be defenselessly slaughtered. It was unfortunate that the Mulan didn't mind the deaths of mortals. Once a group was exterminated, they would immediately send another, exchanging mortal lives for these precious resources. Additionally, they would occasionally set up traps and inflict heavy losses on cultivators attempting to reclaim these resource areas. With the loss of these many cultivators, the Nine Nations Union had turned a blind eye to these locations. Regardless, the Mulan mortals wouldn't be able to harvest many materials or mine much spirit stones. So long as they repelled the spell warriors as quickly as they could, the Mulan mortals would obediently follow them back. Henley now saw large ranks of oxen carts making their way to the heavenly south, with many young men and women accompanying them. They should be the mortal division that was sent to gather materials in the heaven south for the time being. Henley remained in the air above them and swept his immense spiritual sense past them, spotting one foundation establishment stage and 3 chi condensation stage spell warriors. Henley lowered his head in thought for a moment before suddenly forming an incantation gesture with his hands. His figure then blurred and reappeared in front of a dilapidated Mulan cart. It was filled with tattered oxen skins along with a few hoes and other tools. With a wave of his arm, Henley turned the cart's interiors into a pile of ash and then sat down inside it without any qualms. From his musings, he concluded that boldly returning to the heavenly south while the Mulan spell warriors were attacking in full force would be rife with trouble. Although he wouldn't be in danger unless he encountered several top-ranked spell warriors, the possibility was still there. This time, he wouldn't be accompanied by a party of 8 nascent soul cultivators. Not only did he need to be wary of spell warriors, but he also had to avoid Wang Tengu and the others to avoid any deadly confrontations. Now that he was hidden amongst a party of mortals, he should be able to make it out safely of the Mulan plains in a few days. Few would pay any notice to a group of mortals, and given his current cultivation, so long as a late nascent soul stage spell warrior didn't inspect the army, his existence was safely hidden. Once he entered the deserts beyond the plains, he would be outside the influence of the Mulan tribes, and he would be able to return to the heavenly south. As Han Li meditated inside the carriage, the conversations of the Mulan mortals outside could be clearly heard. The dialect of the Mulan differed from that used by the people of the heavenly south, but Han Li had already learned their language from a few related Jade slips. With his immense spiritual sense, he had managed to comprehend most of this knowledge in only a couple of days, and was able to clearly listen to what was being said outside. Their conversations was mostly about whether or not they would be able to impress the grand sages from the resources gathered, giving them the opportunity to stand out from their peers. From their words, the Mulan mortals seemed to worship the spell warriors with admiration and reverence as if they were a kind of god. They even believed it to be extremely honorable even if they died in service to these spell warriors. When Han Li heard this, he inwardly sighed and swept his hand, sealing off the interior of the cart from the outside with a barrier of faint azure light. The voices of the Mulan came to an abrupt stop. Silvermoon, how about you talk about what you have gained? From your excitement, you should have acquired many good items. Han Li's sleeve began to stir, and a small white fox flew out from the cuff, circling once in the air before landing in front of him. The small fox laid down on the ground and chuckled. I'm not too sure how valuable these items are, but Master should know. There were many ancient treasures on the first floor, but because I wasn't capable of concealing their spiritual chi as I used my movement techniques, I didn't take any of them. However, there were 6 ancient boxes on the second floor and I took half of them. Hee. I initially thought to take away most of them, but if there were too few of them, it would attract too much suspicion, so I only ended up taking 3. Afterwards, the fox spat out 3 translucent jade boxes in front of Han Li. Han Li then took out a jade box from his waist. The jade boxes in front of him appeared exactly the same as the one the Marquis had tossed to him. Han Li caressed the jade box in his hand and faintly smiled. Master Kang Kun left behind a total of 6 jade boxes and 4 of them are in my possession. It seems it was a correct decision to go. Silvermoon sighed from her lingering fear. Master, your courage is quite great. You took hidden action despite having so many nascent soul cultivators present and had me enter first. Did you not fear being discovered? Han Li smiled and glanced at the small fox. Hee. What was there to fear? At worst, I would merely use blood shadow evasion to flee them. Besides, I was almost completely certain I would succeed. When I used the spiritual light to conceal your entrance, none were the wiser. I was most concerned that you wouldn't be able to conceal yourself after you had taken the treasure. It would have been terrible if they had detected you, but it seems your evasion techniques were far more effective than I could have anticipated. Silvermoon calmly smiled and said, Master jests. Although the evasion techniques of the Silvermoon Wolf clans are great, the most important factor was concealing the Jade box's spiritual chi within my body. It is an entirely different matter whether or not I could have concealed myself from those old eccentrics' spiritual sense. Han Li gently smiled and didn't further pursue the matter. Instead, azure light began to shine from the palm he placed on the Jade box. He then exerted force on his hand, and the box began to reveal a trace of white light. Soon after, a majority of the azure light had been cleanly absorbed by the box. With a clack, the box was easily opened, and revealed a faint blue jade slip within. Han Li gazed at the jade slip for a short moment, and took a breath before taking the jade slip into his hands, and solemnly immersing his spiritual sense within it. The small fox stared at Han Li, its eyes brimming with excitement. As time slowly passed by, Han Li's face retained a calm expression. Silvermoon blinked, puzzled as to why this was. A short moment later, Han Li's expression stirred as he withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip. He frowned and muttered to himself for a moment. A short moment later, he unfurrowed his brow and calmly placed away the jade slip and reached for the second box, uninterested in mentioning the contents of the jade slip. While Silvermoon was greatly curious, she tactfully remained silent on the matter. Han Li opened the second box using the same method as the first. This time, the box contained an exquisitely crafted ring. It was dim and jet black. Silvermoon astonishedly asked, Is that an ancient treasure? It doesn't seem to be. It isn't emitting much spiritual chi. Han Li also seemed uncertain as to what it was. He casually picked it up with his fingers and began to take a closer look at it. After glancing at it several times and scanning it with his spiritual sense, he decisively said, The material is somewhat odd. It should only be a common magic tool, but it's hard to say its use. It is only a magic tool. A trace of disappointment flickered from Silvermoon's eyes. Han Li appeared indifferent and didn't reveal the slightest dejection. Don't worry. Since Master Kang Kun kept it inside a jade box like this, it is certain to have a specific purpose. Perhaps it will prove useful in the future. Silvermoon tilted her head and excitedly said, Master, how about taking a look at what's inside the other two boxes? Han Li opened each of the remaining boxes one by one. One had a small green bottle, while another had a fist-sized chunk of something that glowed with purple light. Han Li casually opened the green bottle and took a whiff of it. An extremely sharp and caustic scent assailed his nose, causing Han Li's to grimace. He hurriedly closed the bottle of what seemed to be venom and glanced at the small bottle with an odd expression before cautiously putting it away. In the end, his gaze fell onto the purple object. He squeezed it with his fingers and found it to be extremely soft. Strands of light occasionally shimmered from the purple object, creating a dazzling sight. Yi, Han Li yelped with astonishment. He then concentrated his spiritual sense onto the object and deeply examined it. A short moment later, his hand suddenly trembled and the purple ball turned into a purple cloud. It circled once above Han Li's head before dropping into Han Li's hand in its original form. It appeared to be layered like a net of glistening purple threads that were as thin as could be. It appeared to be a rare treasure of some sort. When Silvermoon saw the purple net, she spoke with amazement. Isn't this a purple cloud lace? It is an ancient treasure that was renowned even times of antiquity. Joy flickered from Han Li's eyes and he excitedly asked, You know what this is? Since it was renowned, could it be a divine spirit treasure? Silvermoon enthusiastically said, No. Although the purple cloud lace is a top-grade ancient treasure, it is far lacking compared to divine spirit treasures. But with regards to its defensive abilities, it is incredibly flexible and malleable. Depending how well it was refined, the treasure can be used to cover an area of several hundred meters to several kilometers. It is a truly rare large-scale defensive treasure. It is said that the greatest purple cloud lace could protect everything within 50 kilometers, though I don't know how true this is. Of course, it is also incredibly effective at trapping enemies. As for offensive abilities, it is capable of releasing Jade Sun True Fire to extinguish foes. A trace of disappointment appeared on his face, but soon he wore an odd expression. Silvermoon, you seem quite knowledgeable of this purple cloud lace. Could it be that you've seen it before? When Silvermoon heard this, she grew silent for a moment. A while later, she wryly smiled and said, Now that Master mentioned it, I recalled a fragment of my memory before I was refined into an artifact spirit. There seemed to be one particular purple cloud lace that I knew off quite well. As Silvermoon spoke, her expression appeared pensive. She then shook her head and gave up as if the memory was out of grasp. Since this purple cloud lace is so fearsome, and I've never heard of Master Kang making use of this treasure, this was most likely something that he had acquired from Devil Fall Valley. It is a pity that none of the jade boxes that were acquired possessed any information on Devil Fall Valley. It should be contained in Marquis Nanlong's 2 jade boxes. How truly unfortunate. Han Li laughed at himself, but he didn't truly appear dejected. He clearly understood that he would have the opportunity to acquire more treasures if he acquired the secrets of Devil Fall Valley, but at the same time, he would become a huge target. So long as information of this was divulged, who knew how many great powers and eccentrics would come knocking on his door? It was hard to say whether or not the advantages would outweigh the detriments. Silvermoon couldn't help but ask, "Master, did that jade slip not contain them?" Since Silvermoon asked, Han Li answered her with an insipid tone. The jade slip contained the cultivation art and techniques of Master Kang. Although I cannot cultivate the main cultivation art, the whole moon arts, there are several secret techniques and a few cultivation insights that I am able to make much use of. When Silvermoon heard this, she sighed and appeared dejected. At that moment, Han Li put away all the items in boxes. After giving Silvermoon a brief word, Han Li closed his eyes and began to meditate. Silvermoon then drew close to Han Li's body and curled up. She then opened her bright black eyes and began to mindlessly stare at an empty corner of the cart. As the army of Mulan mortals slowly advanced, 2 days had passed. During that time, 2 groups of spell warriors had conducted a search of the army. However, Han Li was awakened by Silvermoon each time, and he was able to easily conceal himself from these low-grade spell warriors. Since the cart Han Li chose contained insignificant items, none of the Mulan mortals had bothered to check it. Once the army left the Mulan plains, Han Li stealthily took off with Silvermoon in his grasp. He took a route different from the army, heading straight in the direction of the heavenly south. With his vast spiritual sense, Han Li was able to detect any spell warriors within 50 kilometers, allowing him to easily avoid them as he smoothly made his way through the desert and into the 9 Nations Union state of Fengyuan. The state of Fengyuan was one of the 3 countries that was closest to the Mulan plains. The mountains on their border were normally garrisoned with cultivators of the 9 Nations Alliance. But after Han Li spent several days inside the state of Fengyuan, he hadn't encountered a single cultivator, but he had encountered many patrols of spell warriors. It was clear that the 9 Nations Unions had found their initial battle against the Mulan spell warriors unfavorable and decided to retreat for the time being. The true battle shouldn't have started yet. Without further thought, Han Li hurried his way through a particularly desolate area. After a smooth, eventless flight for 4 days, he suddenly turned his head to look at a small, obscure mountain with an expression of shock. Soon, his face changed between various different expressions. Just a moment ago, he had detected an area with fierce spiritual chi fluctuations that faintly contained vicious intent. It was clear that there was a battle between high-grade cultivators. Since a battle was taking place here, it was likely to be a cultivator fighting against a spell warrior. With some further examination, Han Li discovered that there were 5 core formation stage combatants, staking their all against a nascent soul eccentric. Amongst these core formation stage combatants, there were a few with auras that Han Li found slightly familiar. After a moment of consideration, Han Li couldn't figure out who it was. After a moment of hesitation, Han Li wasn't able to suppress his curiosity and flew over. With Han Li's exceptional movement techniques, Han Li was able to cover this short distance in the blink of an eye. Once he arrived, he saw various colored lights fill the sky along with the sound of harsh explosions. The battle was greatly fierce. The 5 variously dressed core formation cultivators were currently fighting against an early nascent soul stage spell warrior. Although the 5 core formation cultivators were fighting with all their strength and were controlling their magic treasures with perfection, the yellow-robed, bald spell warrior was slowly pushing back the cultivators with circles of yellow mist. The spell warrior wore a fierce expression. Although he hadn't released his own magic treasure, his fantastical techniques and deep cultivation allowed him to easily deal with them. Were if not for the fact there was a gorgeous woman amongst the core formation cultivators, the nascent soul cultivator likely wouldn't have held back and would have already finished them all off. Although Han Li found this woman familiar, his gaze focused on the fat old man amongst the cultivators. This old man was spirally with silver lightning and was controlling a huge sword magic treasure that repeatedly emitted lightning. He was the strongest amongst the group of 5. Han Li recognized the old man's appearance and cultivation art and wore a complicated expression. He muttered, "It's him. To think that there are such coincidences in this world." After the yellow-robed cultivator battled for such a long period of time, he lost his patience and fiercely glared at the gorgeous woman. "Girl, it seems you cannot recognize my good intentions. Were it not for the fact my cultivation art requires an outstanding cultivation vessel, I wouldn't have spared you for so long. If you don't surrender yourself to me, don't blame me for being ruthless." Once he said this, he spat out a yellow feather. It glowed brilliantly and had something faintly drawn on it. The bald cultivator then took it into his hand. When the fat old man and the others saw this, their expressions vastly changed, knowing that things were far from good. They clearly understood that the spell warrior had been holding back, but they didn't dare to retreat, else they would easily be picked off by the spell warrior. Their chances of survival would be even worse than fighting him together. As such, the 5 bitterly cursed in their minds and could only muster the entirety of their magic power to attack the spell warrior. For a time, the might of their magic treasures were greatly increased, and they were able to forcefully beat back the yellow mist and regain some of their momentum. This infuriated the bald spell warrior. He tossed his feather into the air and spat a mist of yellow chi onto the magic treasure and began to utter incantations. The feather trembled for a moment and gently fanned in the direction of the cultivators. Suddenly, a large whistle sounded through the air, and a deep yellow gale followed in the direction that the feather had fanned. In an instant, the gale turned into a 100-meter-tall tornado and completely engulfed the 5 core formation cultivators. The fearsome, earth-shaking gales caused the magic treasures to unsteadily sway. They seemed to be restricted by the gale and were incapable of breaking free. The bald spell warrior wore a bizarre smile and revealed an expression of pride. "Ha ha! If you won't accept my kindness, then I will use force. How reckless! Don't expect me to stop after matters have reached this far." The bald spell warrior then grabbed the air and suddenly formed a huge hand from the yellow wings. It then made its way to grab the gorgeous woman. The spell warriors planned to first grab the woman to make sure she lived, and instantly exterminate the remaining 4 through a full display of his power. The woman attempted to make use of her blazing flame sword magic treasure to block the large hand, but the gales had caused it to spin out of control. With no way of controlling it, she was incapable of saving herself, causing her complexion to pale. Although the 4 cultivators wished to rescue the woman, they were disoriented and swept away by the wind. Only the fat old man with the deepest cultivation amongst them was able to deal with it somewhat better. In his worry, he forcefully raised his hand and released a meter-long bolt of lightning to strike at the giant hand. However, the attack was completely ineffective. When the yellow hand was only 3 meters away from grabbing the woman, it suddenly disappeared. At that same moment, the yellow-robed spell warrior roared in furious alarm. The windstorm that trapped the core formation cultivator suddenly weakened before soon disappearing. It was as if what had just happened as only an illusion. The group of cultivators looked at each other with dismay and turned their gaze towards the bald spell warrior. However, he was angrily staring in a direction that was completely empty. They couldn't help but reveal astonishment. A fierce expression appeared on the spell warrior's face, and he furiously shouted, "Since you've dared to break my technique, why would you so stealthily hide yourself?" He seemed to no longer pay the core formation cultivators any notice. A man's voice leisurely spoke. "It isn't that I'm hiding myself, but it's just that your cultivation is too lacking to see me. It seems your esteemed self should have just recently entered nascent soul stage. You are far weaker than other spell warriors I've seen." In an azure flash of light, a youth with a common appearance appeared before them. When he saw that the 5 cultivators were caught in a desperate situation, he released an azure essence sword streak towards the feather. Once it was struck, the windstone was easily dissolved. The 5 were initially alarmed by Han Li's appearance, but after sensing that he was at nascent soul stage, they rejoiced, knowing that their lives were saved. The female cultivator promptly saluted him from a distance and respectfully said, "Junior's name is Na Ying. Many thanks for Senior's rescue." Na Ying. When Han Li heard this, he couldn't help but take another look at the woman. He faintly remembered her. However, now was not the time to deal with this, and he simply waved his arm, having the woman cease her salute. The woman and the old man didn't seem to recognize him. It came as no surprise. In the past, he only met each of them once. Now that almost 200 years had passed, it wasn't odd that they didn't recognize him. With that thought, Han Li turned his gaze to the yellow-robed spell warrior and flatly said, "Since your esteemed self hasn't run, it seems you wish to take me on." When the bald spell warrior heard this, he furiously smiled and heartily laughed. "Your esteemed self is also but an early nascent soul cultivator. Your words may be bold, but I must oblige you to demonstrate your abilities." With that said, the bald spell warrior formed an incantation gesture, and he flicked his finger downward, shooting out two shining yellow pellets. Han Li was faintly surprised by this and didn't stop him. He merely narrowed his eyes and watched with interest. The large man was inwardly delighted to see that Han Li remained idle and promptly uttered an incantation. His body was then covered with surging yellow clouds. With imposing voice, he softly shouted, "Rise." When Han Li heard this, his heart stirred as he expectantly glanced around him, but he saw nothing appear. In his doubt, he suddenly heard faint rumbling from the ground. The rumbling soon became thunderous and world-quaking. Han Li swept his spiritual sense to the ground and revealed slight astonishment. Without any further thought, he swept his sleeve, sending two 10-meter-long sword streaks out from his cuff down towards the sound's origin. Han Li frowned. Although the sword streaks struck, they were ineffective. With a rustle of wind, two 40-meter-long horned yellow dragons flew out from the ground and shot towards the bald cultivator. They then surrounded the bald cultivator and continuously revolved around him as if to protect him. Han Li was amazed to discover the two fearsome yellow dragons were entirely formed from earth. They appeared as if they were truly alive. This lifelike aura seemed to originate from the yellow pellet on top of their heads. It pulsed with light, releasing a demonic yellow radiance. Your esteemed self will be the first to witness the might of my constrained spirit beasts. Go." The bald spell warrior furiously smiled and struck the earth dragons with yellow spell seals. The dragons subsequently charged towards Han Li with overbearing force. Han Li furrowed his brow and lightly sighed. He opened his mouth and spat out a sliver of celestial ice flames. The sliver of flame split into two even thinner flames and accurately struck the heads of each of the earth dragons. The flames crackled and instantly enveloped the earth dragons in a layer of ice. The ice sculptures stopped 10 meters in front of Han Li before dropping towards the earth. Then with a flash of azure light, there were two clear explosions. The two frozen earth dragons had been easily shattered by two sword streaks that Han Li flung. Afterwards, he raised his hand and calmly summoned the two yellow pellets into his hand. He took a glance at them before placing them into his storage pouch. Han Li leisurely said, "What other abilities do you have? Please don't hesitate to use them. I wish to see the true might of the spell warrior's spirit techniques." Silence looked over the yellow clouds for a moment, as the spell warrior was shocked to the core at Han Li's effortless disposal of his two earth dragons. A moment later, the spell warrior's sullen voice suddenly left the yellow clouds. "What sect do you come from? Might I know of your distinguished name? You don't seem to match the description of any better-known cultivators. Don't tell me you also entered nascent soul stage in the last 100 years." The last question was uttered with a savage tone. "I'm a nameless individual. If I said my name, you wouldn't know of it. Since fellow Taoist doesn't intend to attack, I won't be polite." Han Li's expression grew sullen, and he slapped the spirit beast pouch at his waist, releasing countless glistening golden flying insects into the air. They were the pure gold devouring beetles that Han Li had meticulously nurtured. This would be the first time that Han Li would be using them against an enemy. He wished to test how effective they would be against a nascent soul stage opponent. "Gold-devouring beetles, you actually possess them, and so many." Much to Han Li's surprise, the yellow-robed spell warrior shouted the name of these insects with a voice of terror before Han Li could order the attack. Without another word, the yellow-robed cultivator turned around and tore through the skies as a streak of yellow light. His swiftness had caused Han Li to hesitate and abandon the idea of pursuing him. He wasn't confident in being able to exterminate a nascent soul cultivator that was wholeheartedly focused on fleeing. Once a nascent soul manifested, even the lightning movement technique was lacking in speed to match it. However, the bald spell warrior was able to recognize his gold-devouring beetles despite having somewhat inferior cultivation. It was truly shocking. Although he felt somewhat puzzled, Han Li dropped the matter and recalled his still untested spirit beast pouch. Afterwards, he slowly flew towards the core formation cultivators with a calm expression. Before the Han Li drew close to them, the fat old man took the initiative to fly forward and deeply saluted him, Many thanks for your assistance, Senior. Might Junior know your esteemed name? Junior is Yellow Maple Valley's Lei Wan. We cannot thank you enough. In addition to Nayan, who had introduced herself before, the others began to salute Han Li as well with gratitude and respect. The giant sword sect's Shiqian, masked moon sect's Tang Minghua, heavenly imperial fortress, Kaian Huan pays their respects to Senior. Senior, Han Li stroked his chin and wore an odd expression on his face. The fat old man was the senior martial Uncle Lei, who had exchanged medicinal herbs for pill formulas. Although he was merely observing the common customs of the cultivation world, Han Li couldn't help but find this action odd. As for the gorgeous woman named Nayan, he had only met her once as Senior Martial Sister Nai, before when she had protected the Murong brothers from Senior Martial Brother Lu back during his time at Yellow Maple Valley. Although Han Li didn't have much of a relationship with her, he had heard much of her aptitude and her beauty both external and within. Back in the past, there had been countless male disciples that had admired her. He didn't expect that after so many years, she would form a golden core. Han Li remained silent and examined both Lei Wan and Nayan with a complicated expression. As this occurred, Lei Wan felt puzzled. Not only did this senior appear excessively young, for some unknown reason, Lei Wan found his face somewhat familiar as if he had saw him before. This had come as a shock to him, and he began to feel apprehensive. As Nayan looked at Han Li, bewilderment suddenly appeared from deep within her eyes. Han Li was disinclined from wasting any more time with this silent display and eventually said, "It seems Martial Uncle Lei truly doesn't remember me. However, the pill formulas Martial Uncle gave to me during that year had been of great help to me." When Lei Wan heard Han Li call him Martial Uncle, his jaw dropped and found himself at a loss for words. But after he heard him mention pill formulas, he suddenly recalled something and began to astonishedly stutter, "Martial Uncle, pill formulas, you're." When the others heard this, they were also dumbstruck. This nascent soul senior had actually called Lei Wan Martial Uncle. This had truly sent their minds spiraling into confusion. But when Nayan heard him, she amazedly examined Han Li once more before saying, "Your Martial Uncle Li's disciple, Han Li, Junior Martial Brother Han." The woman's voice was filled with disbelief. Han Li felt genuine surprise. "I didn't expect that fellow Taoist Nai would remember me." While Han Li was unknown during Qi condensation stage due to his low profile and meager cultivation, truly few knew of him. But ever since he survived the trial by blood and fire, and successfully became Li Huayuan's disciple after entering Foundation establishment, many shrewd individuals had taken notice of him. This senior martial sister Nai was one of them. Once the 6 devilish Dao sects invaded the state of Yue, his reputation surged throughout lower-grade disciples from his achievements in killing so many similar-grade devil Dao cultivators. Although she hadn't seen his face since then, he had left a deep impression on her. With Han Li's appearance exactly the same as before, she recalled the famous junior martial brother Han from the past and unconsciously shouted out his name in shock. "You truly are martial nephew Han." Lei Wan felt his throat turn dry and his mind grew blank. It was said that any strange events could happen in the cultivation world. Outstanding disciples rising to the same status as a senior was a common occurrence, but for a Foundation establishment junior to suddenly reappear at nascent soul stage was something that brought an individual as experienced as Lei Wan into a stupor. Han Li glanced around and calmly said, "Martial Uncle Lei, there is no need to be so surprised. However, this isn't the place to talk. Let's have a chat as we travel instead." Lei Wan's expression wavered several times before bitterly chuckling, "I don't dare to accept the title as Martial Uncle. Since Senior Han has already entered Nascent Soul Sage, I am your junior." His words still preserved the same respect from the very start. Regardless of Han Li's identity in the past, his current cultivation was far beyond his own. He didn't dare to be addressed with such an inappropriate title. The other 3 cultivators finally realized the relationship between Han Li and Wan Tian. After glancing at each other in dismay, weird expressions appeared on each of their faces. Han Li didn't pay this much heed. After a moment of silence, he nodded his head. "Since fellow Taoist Lei says this, I won't be polite. Let us immediately depart from here. Your speed is all right or slow, so I will be bringing you." Once that was said, Han Li slapped his storage pouch, and a small, exquisite item appeared in his hand. Once he flung it into the air, a squarish item appeared before them in a flash of red light. Under control of spell seals, the wind-riding chariot quickly grew larger and appeared over 30 meters wide. "Get in the chariot," Han Li bluntly ordered them. Lei Wan and the others naturally didn't have any objections, and they all flew into the chariot with a blur. Once Han Li stepped onto the wind-riding chariot, he began to infuse the chariot with his spiritual power. After gently trembling for a moment, it tore through the skies as a streak of white light. With its exceeding speed, it disappeared from sight in the blink of an eye. The speed of the wind-riding chariot delighted the others. At this speed, the spell warriors wouldn't be able to pursue them, relieving them of worry that was on their minds. As Han Li drove the wind-riding chariot, he casually asked, "Fellow Taoists, the state of Fengyuan should have already fallen into the grasp of the spell warriors. Why were you there, and how did you come to be blocked by a nascent soul spell warrior? If that area weren't so remote, it wouldn't have been easy to escape even if I took action." When the five heard this, they glanced at each other with various expression. The clear leader of their party, Lei Wan, hesitated for a moment before answering. "Senior might not know this, but we didn't act out of our free will. We were under orders from the Nine Nations Union to carry out an important task. As a result, we were occupied for several days and were present during the Mulan invasion. Helpless, we could only choose a remote route and fly back, however. We encountered a few low-grade spell warriors along the way and had no choice but to kill them. But who could have possibly known that there was a nascent soul spell warrior that was located nearby? Just as we finished killing the last low-grade spell warrior, we were discovered by the old eccentric and were chased down. Although we knew we weren't a match, if we scattered, we would have only met our end sooner, so we could only do our utmost. It was only by a fluke that Senior Han came our way, else we would have met our end." As Lei Wan spoke with gratitude, he examined this martial nephew Han. To tell the truth, he still felt as if all that happened was a dream. When Han Li heard this, he lost interest and indifferently grunted. A short moment later, he then asked, "Fellow Taoist Lei, is my master Li Huiyuan still doing well?" As there was no point in concealing the matter, Lei Wan honestly answered, "Senior Han, junior martial brother Li died 100 years ago in the war with the Mulan spell warriors. As for his wife, she wasn't able to form a golden core and reached the end of her lifespan." Han Li was slightly shaken by his words and revealed a trace of sadness. He then asked, "Were my fellow martial brothers and sisters able to form a golden core?" Lei Wan sighed and said, "No, although 3 of junior martial brother Li's disciples had exceptional aptitude and entered false core stage, they weren't fated to form a golden core." Han Li grew silent for a moment. The appearances of Yu Kun, Song Meng, Zhang Wenyang, and the others appeared through his mind. Past events slowly began to appear. A moment later, he took a deep breath. Since his martial brothers and sisters were unable to form a golden core, he didn't further ask about them. It was likely that they died during meditation. His time spent at Yellow Maple Valley seemed as if it had all happened in an old dream. At that moment, Na Yan suddenly said, "Senior Han, would you happen to be interested in rejoining Yellow Maple Valley?" Han Li raised his brow and immediately answered, "Return to Yellow Maple Valley. I have no such interest. I've already become an elder of the Heavenly Tao Alliance's Drifting Cloud sect, and I am satisfied there." Disappointment appeared from Na Yan's expression, and Lei Wan's expression wavered. As for the other 3, they didn't dare to speak as they were unfamiliar with Han Li. After a moment of hesitation, Na Yan then asked, "Would Senior happen to recognize Zai Okyuyer?" Han Li was stunned for a moment. He asked with an odd expression, "Zai Okyuyer, of course I do, you know that little girl." At that same moment, the appearance of that young, strange-spirited girl came to mind. Chapter 158. In Chapter 236, Han Li traded medicine herbs for Lei Wan's pill formulas. Prior to this, Lei Wan had assisted Han Li in getting rid of a few thousand bamboo sect cultivators. Introduced in Chapter 291, while Han Li was guarding the mortal Qin clan. At the time, Zio Siu and her grandfather were qi condensation cultivators. For payment of the nameless qi restraining incantation, he had introduced her to his senior martial brother, Ma, at Yellow Maple Valley as a disciple. Han Li had a deep impression of the young girl he had recommended to join Yellow Maple Valley, but soon after, he recalled the small old man that had accepted her as a disciple, senior martial brother Ma. When Han Li recalled him, he felt a trace of sadness. That small old man couldn't have formed a golden core given his age, but he was the one who Han Li shared the deepest friendship with at Yellow Maple Valley. Odds were that he already passed away. With both feigned annoyance and delight, she faintly smiled and said, "Little girl, Junior Marshall sister Zio is no longer some little girl. She is already married and entered core formation stage several tens of years ago. Once Han Li recovered from his surprise, he smiled and said, "Oh, she also entered core formation. Now that is surprising." Na Ying gently said, "I have heard Junior Marshall sister Zio speak several times about how Senior drew her into the sect. Junior Marshall sister Zio always felt deep gratitude and concern for Senior Han." Han Li's smile faded away and he insipidly said, "At the time, I simply introduced her to Senior Marshall brother Ma because her aptitude was good, nothing more. It is now only a matter of the past." Na Yan and Lei Wan could only bitterly smile at each other in silence at her failed efforts in an attempt to make Han Li rejoin the sect. As for the reason why Han Li was unwilling to rejoin, the two could guess. During the year the core disciples joined the Nine Nations Union, since Han Li wasn't amongst them because he was but a minor Foundation establishment disciple, he was grouped up to be bait and was abandoned. It was no wonder why he felt so detached towards Yellow Maple Valley and had no intention of returning. As the two had nothing better to say, Han Li suddenly asked the middle-aged masked moon cultivator, "Did you have a female cultivator by the name of Nangong Wan? How is she now?" Han Li's voice suddenly grew gloomy. The middle-aged man named Tang Minghua was surprised, and he soon respectfully replied, "Ah, Senior knows Martial Aunt Nangong. She is currently overseeing the sect and is doing well." In Han Li's shock, he wasn't able to conceal a trace of joy. Martial Aunt. She already entered nascent soul stage. Martial Aunt Nangong successfully entered nascent soul stage over 100 years ago, and she is now an elder of our sect. Is Senior an old friend of Martial Aunt Nangong? Han Li sighed and his eyes became dim. "Old friend. It could be considered so. I received great kindness from your Martial Aunt in the past, and I've always wanted to meet her again. It's a shame that I was occupied with so many matters over the year, and I've never had the opportunity." He. Although Martial Aunt Nangong rarely sees guests, Senior should be able to easily see her. In 3 months, Martial Aunt Nangong will marry the Flowing Mind Sect's Elder Wei, and their Tao Companion ceremony will officialize them as pair cultivators. This celebration originally only invited high-grade cultivators of the Nine Nations Union, but since Senior is her old friend, he will certainly. Han Li felt his mind buzz, and he couldn't hear anything else the middle-aged man said. He suddenly faced the masked moon sect cultivator and coldly asked, "Tao Companion ceremony?" "Yes, she plans on marrying Elder Wei Lycan of the Flowing Mind Sect, who formed a nascent soul 300 years ago and possesses profound abilities. He is a cultivation genius who didn't come from the heavenly south. Both of our sects spent much effort to make this matter possible." Han Li's icy expression frightened the middle-aged cultivator. All kinds of strange thoughts began to well up inside him, but under Han Li's freezing gaze, he couldn't help but continue to speak. Lei Wan and the others revealed an odd expression. Even an idiot could tell that the relationship between Han Li and Nangong Wan wasn't so simple. Why else would Han Li have such a strong reaction upon hearing this? As to the others' surprise, Han Li's icy expression lasted only a moment more before suddenly disappearing. With a gentle tone, he said, "There is no need for fellow Taoist Tang to be afraid. I have no evil intentions. I merely heard that an old love of mine is about to become someone else's woman, and I became somewhat restless. Now that I know of this matter, I will naturally have to celebrate my good friend's ceremony." The middle-aged cultivator sighed in relief at seeing Han Li so calm, and repeatedly uttered words of welcome. However, Han Li only replied with a slight smile. The others in the chariot were also relieved. After all, the 6 sects of UA were now practically one united existence. They didn't wish for anything to happen to one another. Following this, Han Li casually asked a few more questions related to the 6 sects of UA. Since the matters weren't important, the 5 were able to answer all of them. But when he heard that the Yellow Maple Valley ancestor Lingu had reached the end of his lifespan, Han Li frowned for just a moment and quickly unfurrowed his brow as if he hadn't heard this. Han Li suddenly recalled something and asked, "Ah yes, your Martial Aunt Nangong should have a younger cousin by the name of Nangong Bing. She should also be a cultivator of the Masked Moon Sect." The middle-aged cultivator seemed confused and asked, "Nangong Bing? Senior must have heard wrong. Martial Aunt Nangong was always a solitary figure. I've never heard of a younger cousin. Is Senior not mistaken?" When Han Li heard this, he was dumbfounded. After taking a deep breath, he urgently asked, "Nangong Bing should have been a female core formation cultivator of your sect. Could it be that you don't remember?" Tang Minghua wryly smiled. If this person truly belongs to our sect, this junior would definitely know of it. I can pledge with certainty that there is no such woman in our sect. With an astonished expression, Lei Wan couldn't help but interrupt. Fellow Taoist Tang speaks the truth. We would know if such a core formation cultivator existed in the masked moon sect. Where did Senior come to learn of this person? It's nothing, I merely had a misunderstanding. Although Han Li said this, he was flabbergasted and appeared to be at a loss. Han Li now knew that Nangong Bing wasn't the cousin of Nangong Wan, but was Nangong Wan herself with the use of some appearance alterations. It was no wonder why she hadn't treated him so ruthlessly, or why she had such a queer expression when they departed. After that, Han Li completely lost interest in further discussion and simply dropped the chariot forward with a gloomy expression. When the others saw that this senior Han wasn't in a good mood, they didn't dare to carelessly chat. For a time, the wind-riding chariot was completely silent. Less than half a day later, Han Li stopped the wind-riding chariot at some nameless mountain. Han Li stood up and calmly said, "We will have to part here. This place is only a day away from the border of the state of Fengyuan. It should be safe here. I have matters that I must attend to and I cannot continue to keep you company." Lei Wan and the others didn't dare to say anything else and simply thanked Han Li once more for saving their life before flying out of the wind-riding chariot. Han Li didn't say a single word more and promptly turned the chariot before disappearing off the horizon in the blink of an eye. The older heavenly imperial fortress cultivator, surnamed Qian, saw that the wind-riding chariot had disappeared from sight and couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Taoist Lei, is it true that Senior Han was once a disciple of your Yellow Maple Valley and was your martial nephew in the past?" Lei Wan frowned and annoyedly said, "What, do you think I'm someone who speaks empty words?" Although his life had been saved by Han Li, his past junior's cultivation now vastly exceeded his own, and he became a genuine senior. Given how careful he had to be, he couldn't help but be in a bad mood. There is no need for Brother Lei to be angry. I simply found it odd. If fellow Taoists spoke truthfully, Senior Han should be around the same age as fellow Taoist Nai. Fellow Taoist Nai, how long have you been cultivating? Cultivator Qian asked earnestly. As if realizing what he asked, Nai Yan answered with a changed expression. I cultivated for 200 years before reaching early core formation stage. Cultivator Qian rubbed his chin and sternly said, "It seems Senior Han spent only 200 years before condensing a nascent soul. Do you know what this means?" The giant sword sect cultivator couldn't help but shout in surprise. Could it be Brother Qian means? Cultivator Qian solemnly said, "That's right. It is quite possible this person may reach deity transformation stage. It had been tens of thousands of years since this last happened." Although cultivators who reach deity transformation stage soon disappear from this world, each of them were unrivaled in the short time they were here. The entire heavenly south, be they righteous, devilish, or even neutral, all unite during this time, as there is none capable of withstanding an early deity transformation stage cultivator. After some thought, Nai Yan smiled and said, "Brother Qian must be exaggerating. Although fellow Taoist Han managed to reach nascent soul stage in such a short amount of time, reaching deity transformation is still a matter far out of reach. It isn't so easily done. In fact, so long as he reaches late nascent soul stage, he is able to proclaim his own sect a hegemon of their side. That seems much more likely." With a spirited glint appearing from his eyes, the cultivator surnamed Qian slowly said, I merely think too much. If Senior Han doesn't come across any mishap, he'll surely become a greatly influential character in the heavenly south. Given the deep ties he has to Yellow Maple Valley, if he joins, I reckon it won't be long before we can reclaim the state of Yue. After a moment of silence, Lei Wan sighed and said, "Relationship. Fellow Taoists just saw that, although Senior Han originally came from our Yellow Maple Valley, he is now the elder of the Heavenly Tao Alliance's Drifting Cloud sect. Moreover, he doesn't have any intention of returning. Regardless of what sect power he belongs to, Yellow Maple Valley will not be able to rope him in." Once that was said, the others were at a loss for words. The giant sword sect cultivator doubtfully said, "Why does Senior Han treat your sect as such? After all, that was where he came from. Does he have intention of paying back what the sect has done for him?" Lei Wan shook his head and said, "I cannot divulge the specifics, but the odds aren't good. However, from how I see it, his relationship with the masked moon sect Senior Nangong seems deep. Perhaps Senior Nangong can try talking with him. Even if he will not rejoin our six sects, a good relationship can still be formed." Tang Mingyu doubtfully said, "This is possible. I'll have to go back to the sect and inquire about the relationship between Senior Han and Martial Ant Nangong." "Leave it be. Roping in a nascent soul stage cultivator isn't something that we can handle. Have the elders deal with it. This Senior Han should appear at the ceremony in 3 months." Lei Wan then glanced around him and frowned. "Regardless, let's hurry back to the Nine Nations Union. It isn't safe here." When the others heard this, the five ceased their chat and took to the skies. Although Lei Wan spoke with an effortless tone, he became inwardly worried. How could he inform Ancestor Ling Hu of this matter? Could he just say that a disciple he had abandoned in the past had become an existence as powerful as the Ancestor himself? Moreover, that matter had caused Han Li to resent Yellow Maple Valley. Wouldn't telling his Marshal Senior this be the same as directly rebuking him? He could only helplessly sigh several times along the journey before gloomily continuing on his way. Because the wind-riding chariot was far too eye-catching, once Han Li was out of sight from Lei Wan and the others, he put away the chariot and began to fly using ordinary light. Now that he suddenly acquired news on Nangong Wan, and bad at that, he needed to calm himself and have a long thought about the subject. Back in the past, they only had intercourse once and he only saw her 2 times. Because there was such a vast difference in their cultivation, they simply acted as indifferent strangers. But at some unknown time, Han Li had unconsciously thought of Nangong Wan as his own woman. With the successful formation of his golden core and nascent soul, Han Li recognized himself as being worthy of Nangong Wang, and this idea was even further cemented in his mind. As a result, he had nearly lost his sensibilities once he heard that Nangong Wan was about to become Dao companions with someone else. Pretending not to know that Nangong Wan was marrying someone else was something that Han Li couldn't possibly do. The only man who could marry her in this lifetime was Han Li. Moreover, he was convinced that as the man who took Nangong Wan's vital yin, she should have some semblance of feeling for him as well. He definitely couldn't allow the celebration to smoothly carry out. He was currently pondering about whether he should directly head to the masked moon sect and stealthily steal Nangong Wan away or crash the celebration 3 months later. These two methods clearly had their own advantages. Although the first method was easier to carry out, he truly doubted whether or not Nangong Wan would leave with him without objection. After all, she had stayed at the masked moon sect for many years and had become an elder of her sect. There was no way she wouldn't have any apprehensions about leaving. The second option was to directly appear on the day of the celebration. It could be said to be far more challenging as he would face the masked moon sects, the 6 sects of Yue, and even the 9 Nations Alliance. So long as he was able to settle the problems that arose, he could be together with Nangong Wan in a just and honorable fashion without any future worries. Of course, there was a more simple method. He could have this Wei Lycan mysteriously disappear from this world. However, this method was also the most dangerous. The Flowing Mind sect wasn't any small sect. It was the largest sect in the 9 Nations Union, possessing 5 nascent soul stage elders. It was far stronger than the Drifting Cloud sect. If this Wei Lycan stayed inside the sect the entire time, even if he had amazing abilities, Han Li wouldn't even have an opportunity to make an attempt. And even if he managed to kill him, if Han Li's identity was exposed, he would suffer the full brunt of the consequences. As Han Li pondered, he repeatedly came up with different plans. In the end, he decided on a compromise of these methods for the sake of reliability. He decided to first hurry on his way to the masked moon sect to see Nangong Wan and ask about her intentions. If she had heavy misgivings or some other difficulties in leaving, he would pay a visit to the Flowing Mind sect and see whether or not there would be an opportunity to stealthily exterminate Wei Lycan, risking it all for a smooth solution. If there was no opportunity to attack, he would simply appear on the day of the celebration and openly make his own proposal to marry Nangong Wan. Regardless of what happened or her willingness to agree, he must forcefully take her away. There are few things in his lifetime that had ever made him feel this way. He normally acted with regards to reason, not emotion, but this time, Han Li could not allow Nangong Wan to marry someone else. With his current abilities, anything short of a late nascent soul cultivator wouldn't be able to stop him. With this all decided, his spirits were roused. After regaining his bearings, he increased the speed of his flight and quickly traveled. When the 6 sects of Yue were defeated, they could only take refuge with the 9 Nations Alliance. They planted down their sects in the country with the least other sects, the state of Bailiang. The state of Bailiang had sparsely few cultivators due to the lack of cultivation resources. As for selecting who would join the six sects, they couldn't possibly be choosy. Additionally, the six sect cultivators were secretly and openly feuding with the local sects for over 100 years before managing to barely establish themselves. Of course, spirit veins and other resources the six sects of UA had access to were far inferior to what they had in their original country. But after so many years of desperate fighting, the six sects eventually recovered a bit of their strength, and their standing in the Nine Nations Alliance grew. With the masked moon sect being the strongest amongst the six sects of UA, they managed to occupy a mountain range with decent spirit veins. The west side of the state of Bailiang's Gemcut Mountains was the base of the masked moon sect. They had constructed countless buildings of all sorts and laid down various grand restrictions here. The Gemcut Mountains was divided into 3 levels, the lowest level being at the base of the mountain and was where the low-grade cultivators lived. Naturally, only core formation cultivators had the qualifications to live in the middle level. Although foundation establishment cultivators weren't worthy of notice in the eyes of those at core formation stage and above, in the eyes of stagnant chi condensation cultivators, they viewed them as important pillars of the sect. The masked moon sect's various stewards were naturally exceedingly capable people, and all possessed foundation establishment cultivation, the exception being the mortal affairs steward, Yuan Kun. He was the sole chi condensation steward in the sect. The reason this was possible was because the Yuan clan, a mid-sized clan native to the state of Bailiang, had welcomed the six sects when they had just entered the country. They had expended much effort on behalf of the masked moon sect in particular. As a reward for the Yuan clan's actions, the masked moon sect would only assign Yuan clan disciples to this minor position for generations to come. But as luck would have it, Yuan Kun was the nephew of the Yuan clan lord and had no future prospects in cultivation. As a result of the personal request of the Yuan clan lord, the upper echelon of the masked moon sect appointed him as a sect steward. While Yuan Kun may not have much prospects in cultivation, he was well adjusted to the mortal world and was able to smoothly handle his tasks without any mishap, consolidating his position as a steward. Due to the rules of seniority in the cultivation world, the low-grade cultivators in the masked moon sect didn't treat him with much more respect, as he was still only a chi condensation cultivator. He was also held in contempt by the other foundation establishment stage stewards. However, Steward Yuan didn't care about this in the least and leisurely spent his days in the masked moon sect, drawing from his connections and lowering his head when needed. One day, Yuan Kun appeared at a mortal village closest to the Gemcut Mountains, bringing along 2 masked moon sect disciples along with him that possessed lower cultivation. As normal, they went around several stores and purchased a few everyday goods. But unbeknownst to him, after he walked through 3 of these stores, an indiscernible trace of spiritual sense stealthily wrapped around the clothes of the steward, attentively watching this trifling chi condensation cultivator. Not long after Yuan Kun began shopping in the village, he smoothly gathered all the items he needed and flew back to the Gemcut Mountains with his 2 assistants. But when the 3 only traveled 15 kilometers away from the city, silver light suddenly flashed ahead of them, revealing a gorgeous young woman. She looked at the 3 with a captivating smile. "We are masked moon sect disciples, senior." Although Yuan Kun's cultivation was low, the strange scene that appeared before him indicated that the woman was beyond ordinary. He immediately fell back on his identity as a sect member to protect them. However, it seemed as if the woman didn't hear him. She chuckled and blew out a pink mist from her mouth. The mist appeared to be slow, but it enveloped the 3 in an instant. Yuan Kun and company were unable to resist due to their meager cultivation. After smelling a trace of the scent, they felt their minds fade away as they fell unconscious, promptly collapsing onto the ground. Without any hesitation, the young woman waved her sleeve and released a white mist from her cuff. The mist immediately grabbed the 3 and brought them to her side. After glancing at their faces, the young woman giggled and glowed with silver light, immediately taking to the skies with her captives. The white light traveled over 5 kilometers away before dropping down at a desolate forest. There was an azure-robed youth that was sitting down cross-legged beneath a large tree and peacefully resting. Right after the white light suddenly appeared before them, it disappeared. Yuan Kun and company were silently laid down in front of the youth, and the young woman gracefully floated down from the sky. The woman stood in front of the youth and respectfully said, "Master, I've brought people. They called themselves masked moon sect cultivators. They should be what you're looking for." The youth opened his eyes and indifferently asked, "You didn't alarm any others?" Of course, the youth was Han Li, who had spent most of the last month rushing to the state of Baliang. Since he planned on stealthily finding Nangong Wan, he couldn't brazenly pay her a visit on her doorstep. It would better to avoid any unnecessary trouble. As such, he needed to understand a few details about the masked moon sect, and he decided to stay at a small town nearby. As one who had once tread the path of cultivation since he was a low-grade cultivator, Han Li understood that a sect's low-grade disciples were incapable of completely separating themselves from the mortal world. The town closest to the sect should be a place well frequented by low-grade disciples. With Han Li's immense spiritual sense, regardless of how many cultivators entered the city, they would be incapable of escaping his notice. Originally, Han Li was eyeing another masked moon sect Qi condensation disciple, but when a Qi condensation disciple wearing steward robes arrived in town, Han Li's target had changed to him. A disciple of higher rank would naturally know of the sect far better. With a thread of spiritual sense tied around him, he ordered Silvermoon to capture him and his associates. Afterwards, they were brought to the forest where he was waiting. Knowing that Han Li was currently in a poor mood, she abandoned any intent to jest and tactfully replied in an earnest manner, "Master, be at ease." It was an easy task to capture 3 Qi condensation cultivators. It definitely didn't catch anyone's attention. Han Li expressionlessly glanced at Yuan Kun's body and coldly grunted, "Well done. With your demon fox illusion techniques and my dream tear technique, we will have him tell us everything." Silvermoon immediately answered, "As you command, master." Afterwards, she turned around and blew several breaths of pink mist onto the 3 on the ground, filling the entire surrounding area. Han Li stood up and slowly entered the mist. Not long after, faint azure light faintly pulsed from within it. Although the Gemcut Mountains had a notable name, the first time anyone that came to its mountain wouldn't know why it had the name Gemcut. It didn't appear exquisite as its name had implied. Rather, it appeared strange and oversized. The Gemcut Mountains didn't have many branching mountains, but the main mountain spanned tens of kilometers in length. Moreover, the bottom half of the mountain appeared quite smooth and flat without any cliffs, as if it were a huge slope. But the center of the mountain suddenly grew steep. Not only was the mountain stones frighteningly steep, but the spiritual chi was far more plentiful. It was where the core formation cultivators placed their own cave residences. But in order to prevent any attacks from the sky, ferocious spell restrictions were placed down around the top of the Gemcut Mountains. Low-grade disciples have no method of climbing the mountain apart from a few set pathways. Han Li currently stood at the center of the Gemcut Mountains on a simple stone road. He looked up to the top of the Gemcut Mountains with a soft expression. His current appearance had greatly changed through the use of the appearance exchange arts. His entire body and stature had precisely changed to that of Yuan Kun. Of course, he had also restrained his cultivation to Qi condensation stage. After acquiring the information that he wanted from Yuan Kun and his subordinates, he imprisoned the 3 in a dry tree hollow and boldly entered the Gemcut Mountains. With Yuan Kun's steward command medallion, along with the information he had acquired from the dream tear technique, he was able to easily enter the masked moon sect. He currently stood at a market city that was constructed at a corner of the Gemcut Mountains, where thousands of disciples traded for wanted items. Among them were a few stores that sold mortal goods which were specifically managed by this steward Yuan. Han Li didn't directly head to the top of the mountain. Instead, he patiently brought the items that Yuan Kun purchased at the mortal town and delivered them to these stores. He left each of these stores under the respective gazes of the shopkeepers and glanced up the mountain. From these 3 disciples' memories, although Nangong Wan was on the verge of getting married, she wasn't freely accepting visitors despite not being in secluded cultivation. Even the high-grade disciples of the sect found it difficult to meet their martial ancestor Nangong. As for why Nangong Wan would agree to become the pair cultivation companion of the flowing mind sect's Wei Lycan, it was still unknown to Han Li. The 3 he had captured were lowly ranked and didn't know anything of the matter, much to Han Li's disappointment. From their memories, Han Li was able to clearly see, as the youngest nascent soul cultivator in the masked moon sect and an amazing, world-shaking beauty, Nangong Wan held the vast adoration of many of the low-grade disciples in the sect. There were even vast amounts of male disciples that secretly held romantic feelings for her, Yuan Kun being one of them. Although he had only seen Nangong Wan a couple of times in the many years that he spent there, he was infatuated. When he heard that Nangong Wan was to be married, Steward Yuan felt depressed for a long while. When Han Li saw these memories, he was speechless. Now that Han Li had finished delivering the mortal goods, he casually dealt with other matters in accordance to Yuan Kun's memories. Fortunately, Steward Yuan didn't have any particularly deep relationships in the sect, and none were able to see through any gaps in behavior. A while later, Han Li saw that the sky was dimming and felt that it was about time. According to the Yuan Kun's ordinary behavior, he calmly climbed the mountain. Although Yuan Kun was only a qi condensation cultivator, he was still a sect steward and possessed a small, unremarkable residence on the second level of the Gemcut Mountains. Han Li was able to make it into the second level of the Gemcut Mountains without any problems, but he came across a few Foundation establishment cultivators along the way. When they spotted Han Li disguised as Steward Yuan, they each glanced at him with disdain. There were a few that ignored him. When Han Li was alone, he bitterly chuckled as he stroked his chin. It seems that apart from Steward Yuan's subordinates, this person didn't get along well with others. After entering the second level, Han Li didn't go to Yuan Kun's small residence. Instead, he flew towards the top of the mountain along the path on a low-altitude flying tool. Although the other areas appeared empty, Han Li knew that formidable restrictions had been placed there. He naturally didn't dare to touch them. Eventually, Han Li arrived at the border entrance between the second and third level of the mountain. There were two Foundation establishment cultivators that had bluntly blocked his way. The pale-skinned cultivator frowned and loudly shouted, "Yuan Kun, what did you come here for? You should know that you have no business here." After a long while of hesitation, Martial Uncles, this Martial Nephew wishes to see Martial Ancestor Nangong. Would Martial Uncles be able to report this? Once the two cultivators recovered from their shock, they harshly rebuked him without further thought. "What are you saying? Yuan Kun, are you awake? You must be daydreaming to think you can see Martial Ancestor Nangong." Han Li wore a miserable expression and said, "When this Martial Nephew went out to purchase a few items, I encountered a senior with an unfathomable cultivation. He wanted me to give something to Martial Ancestor Nangong. He even placed a restriction on my body, saying that only Martial Ancestor Nangong would be able to dispel it." The pale-skinned cultivator asked bewilderedly, "Senior, was he a core formation cultivator?" Continuing his dejected expression, he helplessly said, "This Martial Nephew isn't sure, but this cultivator stated that he was an old friend of Martial Ancestor Nangong and wished to send her a congratulatory gift, having heard that he grand celebration was drawing near. There are still some things that I have to personally say to her." An old friend of Martial Ancestor, could he also be a nascent soul senior? This time, the burly cultivator had spoken with alarm. After the pale-skinned cultivator recovered from his surprise, he doubtfully said, "It is possible, but since Senior was already there, why didn't he personally arrive at the mountain and present the gift? Who knows, maybe this Senior has some of other matters to attend to, or maybe he finds it inconvenient." After a few of his musings, the burly cultivate bluntly said, "Martial Nephew Yuan, extend your hand and let us see the restriction on your body." Having expected this, Han Li calmly extended his arm towards him and surged spiritual power throughout his power, simulating a bizarre magic power restriction on his body. The burly cultivator grabbed onto Han Li's arm and revealed astonishment after sensing it for a short moment. The pale-skinned cultivator also curiously placed two of his fingers on Han Li's arm. Not long after, he wore a similar expression on his face. The pale-skinned cultivator eased his expression and his tone grew less harsh. "That's right. A fearsome restriction has been placed on your body. From the degree of its complexity, it appears to have been laid down by a nascent soul cultivator. However, we cannot allow you to easily climb the mountain on this alone. First, take out the congratulatory gift. One of us will take it to Martial Ancestor Nangong and see whether or not this person is truly an old friend of hers. If Martial Ancestor is willing to see you, you can climb the mountain. Do you understand, Martial Nephew Yuan?" When Han Li heard this, he wore a bitter expression, but after some thought, he nodded his head. Han Li took out a long wooden box from his storage pouch and handed it over to him. He anxiously added, "This is fine. However, Martial Uncle must clearly explain the matter of the restriction placed down on my body." The lid of the wooden box had a faint silver restriction talisman placed on top of it. From its spiritual chi fluctuations, it appeared to be quite importantly. It was clear to see this was to prevent anybody from opening the box as it was delivered. "I understand. Properly wait here for the time being. Junior Martial Brother Ma, I am going." The pale-skinned cultivator spoke impatiently to Han Li and gave a word of warning to the burly cultivator before flying off on his magic tool with the wooden box in hand. Han Li could only calmly stand in place. Although he was confident that Nangong Wan would see him once she opened the box, he still felt somewhat apprehensive. He answered the intermittent questions from the guard that was left behind. However, when he asked of the appearance of the senior who had delivered this gift, Han Li answered that this senior was wearing a cloak and that he couldn't tell whether or not they were a man or a woman. After the time it took to finish a meal, the pale-skinned cultivator returned with empty hands. Martial ancestor Nanlong said that this person is truly an old friend of hers, and that I am able to bring you to see her to dissolve the restriction. After curtly speaking, the pale-faced cultivator had Han Li follow him up the mountain. Han Li was overjoyed by this, and wore an excited expression as he followed the pale-skinned cultivator. Be careful, there are paths that you cannot take no matter what. These restrictions are far more formidable than the restrictions on the center level. Even I wouldn't survive if I fell into them. Of course, Han Li answered with acknowledgement. At that moment, a streak of blue light shot forwards to meet them. The pale-skinned cultivator seemed to recognize the owner of this light and stopped in place with a respectful expression. Soon, the light arrived before the two and faded away to reveal a middle-aged, embroidered-robed cultivator with an imposing appearance. The embroidered-robed cultivator glanced at Han Li and said with a cold tone, "Martial nephew son, why have you brought a chi condensation cultivator to the top of the mountain? Do you not understand the rules here?" The pale-skinned cultivator seemed to hold much reverence towards the embroidered-robed cultivator and hastily explained, "Martial Senior Lan, this martial nephew is only following martial ancestor Nangong's orders. I wouldn't have the courage otherwise to dare to do this." At that moment, Han Li swept his gaze past the embroidered-robed man to discover that he was merely an early core formation cultivator, and that he need not pay him much heed. Although these were his thoughts, he also assumed a respectful expression and didn't dare to rashly speak. When the embroidered-robed cultivator heard this, he was stunned for a moment before astonishedly asking, "Martial Aunt Nangong wishes to see this person. Tell me how this came to be." "It's like this, Martial Nephew Yuan." Unknown whether the pale-skinned cultivator didn't dare to conceal this matter from his martial senior or that he was indifferent about the matter, he narrated the events that had occurred. An old friend of martial Aunt Nangong placed a restriction on his body. The embroidered-robed cultivator frowned and suddenly looked at Han Li with a penetrating gaze. The embroidered-robed cultivator bluntly ordered, "Let me have a look at the restriction on your body." Han Li cursed at this person's nosy meddling and could only helplessly obey. The embroidered-robed cultivator grabbed Han Li's wrist and deeply examined it for a moment before nodding his head. "Yi, this is truly odd. However, although this restriction is complex, it isn't malicious. It seems this person didn't have any ill intent. Go ahead and see Martial Aunt Nangong." Afterwards, he paid the two no further heed and shot down the mountain in a flash of faint blue light. A short moment later, the light dimmed and grew indistinct, disappearing soon after. The pale-skinned cultivator waited until the embroidered-robed cultivator departed before taking a deep breath and gazing in the direction that the light disappeared. He muttered, "Martial Uncle Lan's incorporeal evasion technique can be said to be as blue as his name. Although he is only at early core formation stage, even late core formation cultivators would find it difficult to deal with him." The incorporeal evasion technique. When Han Li heard this, his heart stirred. Could this person have something to do with the old eccentric Qiang that he saw during the trial by blood and fire? Perhaps he was a descendant or disciple. At that moment, the pale-skinned cultivator had relaxed and continued to lead the way. Soon after, Han Li tossed the matter of the embroidered-robed cultivator to the back of his mind. Because the top level of the Gemcut Mountains didn't house many cultivators to begin with, the two didn't encounter anybody else as they traveled to a cave residence close to the peak of the mountain. The pale-skinned cultivator spoke with a tone of admiration. "This is martial ancestor Nanlong's meditation area. Speak carefully when you reply to the martial ancestor, and don't say anything unrelated to the restriction placed on your body. Perhaps she may have some benefits in store for you." After he said that, he turned towards the gate and respectfully said, "Reporting to martial ancestor, the disciple is already here." "I understand. Have the disciple enter alone. You may take your leave." The voice faintly carried a trace of familiarity and strangeness. Once those words were said, the door to the cave residence flickered with yellow light and the stone opened. and Li walked forward without any hesitation. To Han Li's surprise, there was a beautiful female cultivator wearing yellow short-sleeved robes that stood behind the door. She appeared to be the age of 18 and possessed early foundation establishment cultivation. The woman examined Han Li's transformed figure of Yuan Kun and found nothing to be wrong. She coldly said, "Follow me. Martial Ancestor is waiting for you in the main hall." The woman turned around and entered the cave residence. Han Li lightly sighed and closely followed after her. Nangongwan's cave residence couldn't be considered large. The foundation establishment woman brought Han Li down a short corridor and through several small side rooms before arriving at the main hall. The hall was elegantly decorated, and there was some unknown essence being burned at an unknown corner of the room. There were two interesting small flower pots, each with a precious herb flourishing in them. There was an exquisite square wooden table at the center of the hall. Each side had a light green straw chair. One of the chairs was occupied with a black-haired, white-clothed young woman. She was looking down at the huge sparkling silver sword in her hand. The wood box on the table was open, now laid empty. The surname, Land Chinese letter, is the same character for blue. First mentioned in Chapter 176, Elder Qiang was a formidable core formation cultivator from the masked moon sect. When the white-clothed woman saw Han Li enter, she stroked the silver sword before returning it to the wooden box. She then raised her head and gently gazed at Han Li. The face that Han Li yearned for in countless dreams had appeared before him. A slightly pointed chin, a delicate nose, and bright, enchanting eyes. These traces of familiarity caused Han Li to feel a trace of excitement along with a sliver of warmth in his heart that had remained dormant since he had last spent time with her. It felt like it had been ages ago. Any thoughts or words had already been released from his mind at that moment. Only an overwhelming passion remained. When Nangongwan saw that Han Li was so imprudently staring at her, she was stunned for a moment. With a pensive expression appearing on her face, she unconsciously frowned. Nangongwan raised her head and turned to the yellow-clothed woman that had guided Han Li. She calmly said, "You go down first. I will be speaking with him alone." After a moment of brief surprise, she immediately lowered her head and said, "Yes, Martial Ancestor." She then quietly left the hall and disappeared from sight. Han Li calmly waited for the yellow-clothed woman to disappear before glancing around with his spiritual sense. Seeing that there was no one else present, he stared at Nangongwan and formed a hand incantation. With a series of explosive crackles coming from his body suddenly grew a few inches, and a flicker of azure light revealed his true face. "So it really is you, Han Li." A complicated expression appeared on Nangongwan's face, but there was no trace of surprise, only a faint sigh. Not knowing how to address her, he stuttered before clumsily saying, You knew I was coming." After he said this, Han Li felt a tinge of regret and couldn't help but feel annoyed with himself. "You call me Wanner." Han Li's clumsy reaction had caused Nangongwan to unfurl her brow. She softly smiled, displaying her bright eyes and mesmerizing beauty. "Wanner." Han Li felt overjoyed and couldn't help but softly shout her name. He had finally released the apprehension that was lingering in his heart. She truly harbored some feelings for him. She wouldn't have shown him such an appearance otherwise. For a moment, Han Li stared at her with fascination. Nangongwan blushed and turned her head, insipidly saying, "What's nice about looking at me? Could it be I'm more beautiful than your new concubine?" When Han Li heard her unhappy words, he couldn't help but be alarmed. "Concubine, so you knew of that as well?" Nangongwan lowered her head and glanced down at the floor. She snorted and annoyedly said, "Your newly joined elder of the Drifting Cloud sect and recently condensed a nascent soul at around 200 years of age. How could I not know?" After a short moment, something soon came to mind. Was it the cultivator surnamed Tang? Nangongwan wiped away a sliver of her hair and mysteriously smiled at Han Li. "So you aren't dumb. It truly was that martial nephew Tang. He had made use of a special method to send me a sound transmission talisman. When I received it, I couldn't dare to believe it. After disappearing for so many years, you return as a nascent soul cultivator. In the past, I hadn't particularly paid much attention to this field. As such, I immediately called for recent information on the Drifting Cloud sect. Although it was a bit slow, I know of your general circumstances. With your sudden appearance, you became an elder of the Drifting Cloud sect. You left the trade fair halfway and departed, but I know little of this. But your concubine still remains at Soaring Skies City until this day." Han Li touched his chin and revealed a trace of embarrassment as he tried to explain. "At the time, I told her to follow an elder back to the sect. It seems there is something delaying her. However, this concubine. Nangong Wang interrupted. Enough, there is no need to speak more of it. I'm not going to complain about how you took in a concubine. After all, am I not getting married myself? Her expression suddenly grew saddened and incredibly weak. Han Li's expression slightly changed. With a sullen voice, he unhurriedly asked, "What's going on with that? Could it be you truly plan to marry that person?" Nangong Wan bit her red lips and bright eyes flickered. "Before I answer that question, I have questions of my own. Why have you come? Do you want me to not marry this person, or do you wish to take me away?" With complete and unwavering determination, Han Li immediately answered, "Of course it is to take you away. I want you to become my wife. No matter who it is that wishes to take away the one I cherish, they will have to go through me first." "That is quite the dream, but when I have ever agreed to become your wife?" Nangong Wan blushed and shyly rebuked him in a charming display. Han Li silently smiled and said nothing else. As he was new to matters such as this, it would be better to not delve too deeply. Soon, Nangong Wan's shyness had disappeared, and she expressionlessly said, "You should know that in the year of the trial by blood and fire, my first thought was to slash you into countless pieces after you took my virginity. Afterwards, I would use the vermilion bird band to turn your body into ashes to fulfill my revenge. After all, I had bitterly guarded the purity of my body for over 100 years, but you came along and took it. How could I not bear great hatred towards you? From what you've said, I should have already died." Han Li rubbed his nose and found himself not knowing whether to laugh or to cry. Once that was said, Nangong Wan's face grew scarlet and she unhappily rebuked him. "Of course. Were it not for some unexplained coincidence that caused my heart to soften, I wouldn't have released you. Do you believe that core formation cultivators are so easily dealt with?" Han Li grinned and said nothing else. Once Nangong Wan explained a trace of the grudge she held against him, she continued, "After we left and returned to the sect, for some unknown reason, I was unable to cast off your image regardless of whether it be during cultivation or secluded meditation. Moreover, your image only became more distinct over time, and it appeared more frequently in my mind. At that moment, I realized that you became an inner demon of temptation. If I didn't cast you off, I feared that my cultivation would become forever stagnant. There were only two methods to cast off an inner demon of temptation. I had to either marry you and become one with you, fulfilling the temptation, or to have you disappear from this world. If you no longer existed, the inner demon would gradually fade. Because there was far too great a disparity in cultivation, it was impossible to choose the former. After a long while of inner torment, I eventually clenched my teeth and decisively decided to exterminate you. But before I could do this, the 6 Devil Dao sects had invaded us, and I came across you at the war camp for the sects of UA. You were a Foundation establishment cultivator at the time, and this had caused my determination to waver. If you were able to continue progressing, I felt that becoming husband and wife wouldn't be impossible." Hanalei bitterly smiled and muttered, "So it turned out that you wished to kill me at the time. When I saw you during that time, I was incredibly excited to see you, but your cold and detached attitude was a rude awakening. It had depressed me for quite a few days afterwards." Nangong Wan smiled upon hearing this but continued without answering. From then on, the sects of UA had suffered a great defeat due to Spirit Beast Mountain's betrayal. Each of the 6 sects then began to evacuate their disciples from the state of UA. As the youngest core formation cultivator, I was originally among those evacuated, but at the time, I had a good friend within Yellow Maple Valley. In our letters, I came across vague plans for Ancestor Ling Hu's evacuation plan. I knew that you were likely to be in the danger zone. I felt shocked at this fact and only one thought had filled my mind: to rescue you. When I left, I was too slow. The battle had already concluded. A majority of the disciples had already died with only a few managing to escape. Not knowing whether or not you survived, I could only helplessly return to my own sect and assist the rearguard disciples in their fight against the Devil Dao. As a result, I was gravely injured against a core formation cultivator and was pursued by several juniors. I think you should know of what happened afterwards. There is no such person as Nangong Bing in this world. I had only changed my appearance. This wasn't because I didn't wish to reveal my true identity, but I couldn't tell you that a core formation cultivator like myself came to rescue you with the particular intention of marrying you. Moreover, because I absorbed most of your cultivation at the time, it was even more embarrassing to reveal my true face to you. However, I didn't wish for you to follow me back to join the Masked Moon sect. I just wanted you to follow me so I could reveal my true appearance and assist you in forming a golden core. We would marry afterwards. But who could have thought of how greedy you were, or perhaps due to chauvinistic stubbornness, that you would simply take the spirit stones? You left me completely helpless." Once that was said, a faint smirk appeared on her face, and she fiercely glared at Han Li. But how was it that Han Li had felt the sliver of happiness from her eyes? Of course, Han Li couldn't have known that if he agreed to follow her back to the masked moon sect, Nangongwan would have definitely brought up the prospect of marriage. However, the most likely resolution was that he would have casually agreed to become another woman's Tao companion, resolving her inner demons in a disappointing fashion. The one who married him would have likely been someone that Nangongwan had personally sought out. There isn't much to be said after we parted. I returned to the masked moon sect. Once my sect gained footing in the state of Bailiang, I snuck into the state of UA to find you. However, the information I acquired was rather terrible. I only knew that you had been hunted down by the Ghost Spirit Sect. The concrete details of the matter were unknown. Not long after, I was discovered by the Devil Tao and was forced to return to the Nine Nations Alliance. Afterwards, I never acquired information on you. I believed you dead, and my inner demons with regards to you had gradually disappeared. Along the way, I managed to condense a nascent soul and smoothly became an elder of the masked moon sect. And here we are now. Nangongwan spoke with a calm tone. Han Li's expression changed several times as he listened to Nangongwan's unhurried explanation. In the past, she had done many things he was completely ignorant of, causing him to look upon her with even greater warmth. A moment later, Han Li couldn't help but ask, "What's this about Wei Lycan?" Nangongwan coldly smiled. "Wei Lycan, I unintentionally encountered him as he was traveling several years prior. I am not fond of him. He appears to be elegant and noble, but he is a thieving hypocrite and a philanderer. I heard that he secretly performs yin drawing techniques on each of his 8 female disciples. He most likely harbors ill intentions towards marrying me. That was why I refused his first request to marry me." "Refuse what changed?" Han Li curiously asked. Nangongwan didn't directly answer and suddenly asked, "Do you know of the 3 great nascent soul cultivators in the heavenly south?" Han Li's expression turned grim and faintly felt that something was amiss. "Naturally. There is a late nascent soul cultivator in the righteous Tao, the devilish Tao, and the Nine Nations Alliance, each only a step away from entering deity transformation stage. This is how each of the 3 superpowers remain on equal footing. As for our heavenly Tao alliance, we have 2 mid-nascent soul stage Tao companions that are proficient in cooperative techniques. Together, they are capable of restraining a late nascent soul cultivator, albeit with difficulty. What? Does Wei Lycan have anything to do with one of them?" "Exactly. Wei Lycan's great uncle is Wei Wuya, one of the 3 great cultivators. As the highest-ranking elder of the Nine Nations Alliance, this Wei Wuya cultivates a rarely seen venomous cultivation art. With a sweep of his hand, he's able to take another life without any contact. His immense abilities are beyond imagination." Nangongwan folded her fingers together and bitterly smiled. Han Li scowled and a malicious light surfaced in his eyes. "Could it be that this Wei Wuya personally made things difficult for you?" Nangongwan wore an indignant expression. "No, but Wei Wuya is personally involved. You may not know this, but our sect's previous great elder passed away and was replaced with an old senior martial sister. Although her cultivation isn't weak, she is of shrewd mind and is normally at odds with me. Although we get along with our other elder, the relationship between us is awful." Han Li's expression grew sullen as Nangongwan moved on to the heart of the matter. After Nangongwan gritted her teeth, she said, "After refusing Wei Lycan's marriage request several times, Wei Lycan personally caused Wei Wuya to pay a visit to this senior martial sister of mine. Although I didn't know what the two spoke about, half a year later, during an incarnation period of my female essence incarnation technique, she suddenly restrained and forced me into wedding Wei Lycan." After a moment of shock, Han Li incredulously said, "Is your senior martial sister not sick in the head, using such a method to deal with a nascent soul cultivator of the same sect?" Nangongwan smirked and mockingly said, "Isn't that the truth? I hadn't expected her to be crazed to this degree. However, it seems Wei Wuya's conditions were truly difficult to refuse. I later found out that so long as the masked moon sect agreed to this marriage, not only would the 6 sects expand out of the state of Bailiang, but Wei Lycan would be willing to leave the flowing mind sect after marrying me and join the masked moon sect. For these 2 benefits at the price of one, she acted without any hesitation. Regardless of my intentions, she released information that I was to be wed with Wei Lycan and prepared to hold a celebration, wishing to forcefully conclude the matter before it can be changed. If I wish to later back out, I would have no method of doing so. Han Li delightedly said, so it turned out you hadn't agreed to this matter. These words of you deliberately wishing to marry came as a shock to me. Nangongwan looked at Han Li and unhappily said, I still have something I wish to ask you. Even after condensing a nascent soul for so many years, why is it that you didn't seek me out sooner? If you came a year earlier, this troublesome matter could have been avoided. It isn't that I didn't wish to see you, but rather. Han Li attempted to give an explanation, but after a moment, he found this truly strange as well. Although Han Li faintly felt that Nangongwan should have been someone that he truly cherished, for some unknown reason, he never thought to touch upon this feeling. If it weren't for news of Nangongwan suddenly marrying, he feared that he still would have hesitated on this matter rather than directly confront these feelings. As Han Li's expression remained calm, Nangongwan gracefully stood up and took several steps toward Han Li. She directly looked into his eyes and said, in truth, my own circumstances are about the same as yours. Although our own experiences and abilities are far beyond that of mortals, we are fearful and unfamiliar towards our first venture of our emotions. Even if we have a deep impression of each other, we aren't a mortal pair after all. We cannot release all of our passion in an instant and have our emotions blaze like a star. For an optimal attitude for cultivation, cultivators have no option but to weaken our emotions and bury a majority of them. What is left behind is only an ordinary and flat relationship that is enduring. But when I heard that you were still alive, I felt more than happy and spent 2 days in careful consideration before eventually deciding to accept you in accordance to my feelings. After she said this with a soft tone, Nangongwan extended her slender hand and grabbed Han Li's palm. After a moment of silence, Han Li placed his other hand on top. The soft sensation of her hand caused him to feel a trace of comfort. Nangongwan blushed and she quickly pulled her hand away, bashfully glaring at Han Li in the process. Han Li didn't mind this and simply smiled. Wanner, although you are trapped here from how calm you are, you should already have a plan for escape. Why else would you appear so worry-free? When Nangongwan heard this, she smiled and sly intent was betrayed from her eyes. You're a quick thinker. Yes, although I am under house arrest, only a sparse few in the upper echelons are aware of this matter. Ordinary disciples are completely ignorant. Else, I wouldn't have been able to directly receive a sound transmission talisman from Marshal Nephew Tang. However, many restrictions have been placed on my body in fear that I would flee. Other restrictions are of no matter to me as they were placed without knowledge of what amazing abilities I was capable of once I entered nascent soul stage. These common restrictions can be removed at any time, restoring my original cultivation. But there is one restriction that isn't easily dissolved. The heart restraint technique was personally placed on my body by that senior martial sister. This technique was something that she prepared from a record. If I were unwilling to agree to the marriage, she'd be able to use this technique to temporarily control me. She even used her own blood essence to place down the restriction, creating a restriction talisman that serves as the crucial point of the restriction. Through the use of this restriction medallion, I will not be able to escape her control within 50 kilometers of her, unless it is destroyed. Fortunately, there isn't too great a gap between our cultivation, and she is only able to control me to perform a few simple movements. She will have no control over my body's magic power. Han Li curiously asked, then your plan was to? Nangongwan softly smiled and chuckled. She said with a worryless tone, I originally thought to restore my magic power when security was the lightest several days before the ceremony was about to take place. Afterwards, I would immediately flee far away. So long as I am outside of the restriction talisman's range, she cannot control me. But since you're here now, I'll leave this matter to you. After all, you are the man that wishes to marry me. From what I've heard, you were able to easily defeat a cultivator of a similar grade. You should be quite skilled. Han Li frowned and muttered, heart restraint technique. That restriction is truly troublesome. Are there other methods of dissolving it apart from destroying the medallion? Nangongwan's bright eyes flickered and she carelessly said, even if there isn't, leave it be. We'll be far away from the masked moon sect anyhow. Han Li's eyes narrowed and a cold glint flickered from his eyes. He imposingly said, it's fine. Isn't it just a restriction talisman? It should be in your senior martial sister's grasp. I can simply go and fetch it. I'll be able to vent some anger on your behalf as well. Nangongwan shook her head and pursed her lips in a smile, revealing a trace of mischievousness. I was merely saying it to test your intentions. I truly had no intention of having you go and seize the restriction talisman. My senior martial sister is a mid-nascent soul cultivator and possesses abilities beyond that of early nascent soul cultivators like us. Let us sneak away stealthily. At worst, I'll just spend another 10 years whittling away at the formation. Han Li grew silent. The time for him to be united with this otherworldly woman was soon to come. Han Li smiled and confidently said, "No matter. Let us first see how it goes. If it doesn't succeed, we can make our escape. With me around, I'll be able to bring you out regardless of the restrictions on your body." After studying at Han Li for a while, she seemed to understand that there was no changing his mind. She bit her lips and said, "Fine. Although I don't know how vast your abilities are, you should be somewhat skilled given your confidence. But there is no need for you to take the initiative to go find her. My senior martial sister's residence is layered with restrictions, so I'll draw her here instead. Afterwards, we'll be able to draw assistance from the restrictions to capture her, while her guard is down." After a brief moment of thought, Han Li smiled and said, "That his method is truly more reliable. However, can you still use the restrictions on your cave residence? When I arrived, it appeared that the restrictions were shattered." Nangong Wan quickly replied, "No worries. Although a few of the surface restrictions have been shattered by my senior martial sister, there is still one very formidable hidden restriction that she has yet to discover. It can still be used." Han Li rubbed his chin and said, "Good. Since we can use that, I also have several spell formation tool sets. Although they aren't powerful after they are placed, they will be able to provide a certain level of impedance." Having heard Han Li, Nangong Wan became more confident. "You have formation flags. All the better. We cannot delay. I will need half a day to remove the restrictions on my body and restore my magic power. You should start placing down the spell formations during that time." After a moment of thought, Han Li puzzlingly asked, "If we manage to restrain your senior martial sister, can't you take control of the masked moon sect? That way, we wouldn't have to flee." After a moment of surprise, Nangong Wan shook her head. "That won't be possible. Apart from our senior martial sister, there is one other nascent soul cultivator. Although my relationship with him is good, he certainly won't allow me to take the title of Grand Elder illegitimately. I also have no desire for a power struggle. I only want a peaceful place where I can quietly cultivate." And Li shook his head and coldly smiled. "If that's the case, then leave it be. If this succeeds smoothly, you can follow me back to the Drifting Cloud sect. Even if the Nine Nations Union were stronger and Wei Wuya heavily doted on Wei Lycan, he wouldn't dare to rashly offend the Heavenly Tao Alliance along with two nascent soul cultivators during an invasion of spell warriors." Soon after, he slapped the storage pouch at his waist and flipped his hand, summoning a pile of formation flags and formation plates. When Nangong Wan saw this, she faintly smiled and sat back down. With her eyes closed, she formed an odd incantation seal with her hands. A short moment later, her snow-white clothes began to emit a scarlet red flame. It reached a meter tall and enveloped Nangong Wan. And Li then set into motion. His body blurred and circled around the hall, placing down formation flags and plates all over the hall. Radiance of various colors briefly shone before sinking deep into the hall and disappearing from sight. Arranging the formations took little time, but in order for the spell formations to display as much power as possible, Han Li had the spell formations cover only the area of the hall. Additionally, he also placed the spell formations so that they would remain hidden unless they were meticulously searched for. These formation flags and plates were all something Han Li had refined during his time as a core formation stage cultivator. They lacked even the power to deal with core formation cultivators, let alone nascent soul cultivators. Han Li didn't have much hope for them. After placing down all the spell formations, he muttered to himself and suddenly swept his sleeve. A streak of white light shot out from his buff and flew a circle around Han Li before dropping down in front Han Li, revealing itself to be small white fox. Silvermoon beamed and said, "Master, are you not scared that you'll make Mistress Nangong jealous by summoning me?" And Li raised his brows and glared at the small fox, "Humph, who'd get jealous over an artifact spirit like you? I will be facing a mid-nascent soul stage cultivator soon, and I cannot allow her to flee. Although I have some restrictions assisting me, I will also need you to help. A mid-nascent soul cultivator is incomparable to an early nascent soul cultivator. It will be difficult to overcome her even while using all my power." Silvermoon swiftly replied, "Master, how do you plan on having this servant assist you?" Han Li took something out from his storage pouch and handed it over to Silvermoon. "It's simple. Use this treasure during a suitable moment. You cannot allow her to escape." Silvermoon clasped the item with her claw and incredulously said, "You're letting me use this?" Han Li calmly said, "Right. If you're controlling this item, you should be able to display even more of its might than I can. and I would consume magic power by using this item, so it'd be better to let you use it. Of course, you will only be able to use this for a short time. After all, artifact spirits aren't able to control other treasures for a long period of time. Silvermoon lowered her head and dejectedly said, "Silvermoon understands." At the same time, she rubbed the object several times as if she were fond of it. When Han Li saw this, he felt his heart stir. After Silvermoon grasped this item, her entire body flickered with silver light, and she disappeared into the ground. Afterwards, Han Li walked several circles around the hall, and suddenly raised his head to look at the ceiling with sudden inspiration. After muttering to himself for a moment, he tossed his spirit beast pouch into the air and summoned a large swarm of black-tainted gold-devouring beetles. They revolved above him as a 3-meter-wide cloud. Han Li took a deep breath and blew an azure mist onto the cloud. With his 2 hands in an incantation seal, he softly uttered an incantation, and the insect cloud buzzed for a moment before transforming into specks of starlight. The specks of light then floated up to the ceiling and disappeared with flickers of azure light, completely masking their aura. Han Li narrowed his eyes and stared at the ceiling for a moment more. Having sensed nothing obvious, he nodded his head in satisfaction. Having laid this all down, Han Li turned his gaze to Nangong Wan. At that moment, the flames on her body wandered and shifted until they took the shape of a round red disc that strangely pulsed with light. The changes in the flame also influenced the spiritual qi in the hall, causing it to grow restless. Han Li frowned at the sight. After some thought, he struck a nearby stone pillar with a spell seal and caused a layer of azure barrier to suddenly appear with Nangong Wan at its center. Soon, the spiritual qi around the hall returned to normal. When Han Li saw this, he smiled and extended his arm, summoning a straw chair into his grasp. He then casually took a seat across from Nangong Wan and silently stared at her. With such a good opportunity to glance at her captivating face, he naturally wanted to take a good look at the woman he yearned for many years. Not long after, Han Li became entranced and his expression grew lax. But soon, Han Li's figure abruptly disappeared without warning. The woman who had been spying from outside the hall was alarmed by this. Cursing inwardly, she immediately attempted to flee, but she was too slow as she heard Han Li's calm voice from behind her. "Why are you spying on us? Are you not scared your martial ancestor will rebuke you?" Not daring to turn her head, she stuttered, I wasn't spying. It was just that martial ancestor hasn't emerged after such a long time, so I grew worried." This was the yellow-robed woman who had led Han Li into the hall. At that moment, she already sensed a huge pressure appear behind her, compelling her to give her apprehensive explanation. With his hands behind his back, he stared at the young woman and emotionlessly said, "Oh, really? Since you only wish to take a look, why is it that you've hid yourself so thoroughly? You even used such a rare high-grade talisman as a concealing spirit talisman. How did a meager foundation establishment cultivator like you get your hands on that?" "I..." In the young woman's alarm, Han Li coldly said, "There is no need for any further explanation. You will obediently follow me back. Once your martial ancestor finishes, she will decide how to deal with you." Once the yellow-robed woman heard this, she grew fearful and instantly squeezed the talisman in her other hand. Her body flashed with yellow light and she shot down the corridor in an attempt to escape. Han Li coldly stared at her but made no move to pursue her. Once she traveled about 30 meters, a nearby wall suddenly spat a cloud of pink mist which enveloped her. The light surrounding the young woman's body scattered, and her body swayed several times before falling to the ground. In a flicker of yellow light, Silvermoon emerged from the wall and gracefully shook her tail several times before walking up to the young woman with a smile.